Long ago on the face of the earth, there existed a glorious kingdom, so magnificent that people believed it was a gift from heaven itself to mankind. The ancient Greeks called it Atlantis, the kingdom of light, where mortals and gods once walked together beneath the same sky. Their towering temples rose high enough to touch the clouds, their domes gilded with gold, their walls shimmering with silver that caught the brilliance of the sun. Inside vast marble halls, music echoed like the voices of angels, and sacred fires burned red through night and day. They had ships that crossed the seas, monuments that defied time, and according to fragments of ancient records, even flying vessels that could carry men gliding through the skies like iron birds beneath the sunset. A civilization so perfect, even the gods themselves were said to turn and look in wonder. The people of Atlantis believed they were chosen born into glory, inheriting the strength of the ocean and the power of heaven. But slowly, pride, envy, and vanity took root in their hearts, and they forgot who had given them the breath of life. Then, in a single night, the great continent was swallowed by floods and earthquakes. Now 12,000 years have passed, and that once glorious civilization still lies buried deep beneath the sea. But why? Why did a kingdom of such greatness vanish from the face of the earth? Was it because faith decayed and morality followed it into ruin? Is it that whenever virtue collapses, all of humanity must face calamity and civilization itself perishes with it? Could that also be why other magnificent cities like ancient Troy, Pompeii, and Herculaneum were buried beneath what the ancients called the wrath of heaven? Perhaps, when mankind forgets the one who gave them light, the day of judgment draws near, ready to punish those who no longer fear God. And maybe Atlantis was not the only world heaven destroyed. From cities consumed by fire to those swallowed by the flood, could it be that behind them all lies an ancient secret, one that the angels themselves once witnessed? Tonight, let Sleep Codex take you in search of that truth. The truth about the cities destroyed by the wrath of God, and the secret of the fallen angels, those who saw it all. Plato and the origin of the Atlantis story. For thousands of years, no one has truly known whether Atlantis was real. But if you read the ancient records carefully, you'll notice something unusual. It was not a folk legend, but rather a philosophical account written by Plato, the student of Socrates who is regarded as the father of Western rational thought. According to historical studies, the great philosopher Plato, who lived around 400 BC, wrote the Dialogues around 350 BC. He used a series of conversations between Socrates and 3 of his students to describe the mysterious land of Atlantis. And the story begins much earlier, between 638 and 559 BC, with Plato's ancestor Solon, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece, a political reformer, and a famous poet. After finishing his term as chief magistrate of Athens, Solon spent 10 years traveling abroad, visiting places such as Egypt, Cyprus, and Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. When he returned home, he devoted his time to writing, and in several of his works, he mentioned an ancient kingdom called Atlantis. Solon was renowned for his honesty, so the authenticity of his writings was never in doubt. Even Socrates once said, "The good in this story lies in the fact that it is true. It is far better than any fiction." Plato inherited his ancestors' wish and devoted himself wholeheartedly to an unending pursuit of knowledge about the island of Atlantis. He believed this subject surpassed every myth, epic, or grand legend known to mankind. According to Plato's writings, legend says that the creator of the kingdom of Atlantis was Poseidon, the god of the sea. On a small island, there lived a young woman whose parents had both passed away. Poseidon took her as his wife, and together they had 5 pairs of twin sons. Poseidon then divided the island into 10 regions, assigning each of his 10 sons to rule one of them, with the eldest son holding supreme authority. Because the eldest son was named Atlas, the land was called the Kingdom of Atlantis. In the dialogues, Critias, Plato's cousin, said during their discussion that Solon had once traveled to Egypt. He reached the Nile Delta, where the river divided into many branches, and there was a city called Cayce. The people of Cayce welcomed him warmly. But Solon discovered that neither he nor any other Athenian knew as much about the gods and the ancient world as the people of Cayce did. Once Solon tried to tell the people of Cayce about the ancient history of Greece and how far back those events had taken place. Then an old Egyptian priest stood up and said, "Solon, Solon, you Greeks are but children. Among all the Greeks you named, there is not one who can be called an elder." Holding back his surprise, Solon asked, "What do you mean by that?" The old priest replied, "I mean that your minds are still young. You have inherited none of the ancient wisdom of your forefathers, nor do you possess any science grounded in long history. I will tell you the reason for this, because many times throughout the ages, the world has witnessed the destruction of civilizations. There is a story you Greeks know well about Phaethon, the son of the sun god Helios. When he could not control his father's chariot, he set the earth on fire in anger, turning mankind to ashes before being struck down by lightning. Though it now sounds like a myth, it actually reflects the cycle of rise and fall that many civilizations on earth or even in heaven have gone through. When fires sweep across the land, the creatures on high mountains perish first, while those near rivers or the sea survive. During the great flood of the Nile, the Savior of our ancestors delivered us from the waters. Meanwhile, shepherds who lived high in the mountains escaped the flood that the gods sent to cleanse the earth, while those who lived in cities were swept away into the sea. No matter the era, there is one rule that never changes. The flood always flows from the highlands down to the plains and lowlands. That is why we Egyptians have preserved the most ancient and original civilization here. Neither the cold of winter nor the heat of summer can destroy it. Humanity continues to grow and decline in cycles, sometimes increasing in number, sometimes fading away. And so, whether in your land, ours, or elsewhere in the world, whenever great events occur, they are recorded by the ancients and preserved in our temples. But you Greeks and other nations pass down your histories only through books and spoken stories. So imagine if a plague were to strike your land. All that would remain would be a few pitiful records, and your people would have to start again from a primitive beginning, knowing almost nothing about what came before, neither the events that happened here nor those in your own country. Even the genealogies of your ancestors, Solon, are like children's tales. You remember only one great flood, but in truth, such disasters have happened many times. You do not know that once upon your very land, there existed a people who created the greatest civilization of all. You and your fellow Athenians are the descendants of those survivors. But you know nothing of it, because those who lived through it have long perished, and that chapter of history has become lost beyond understanding. The old priest told Solon that according to the ancient Egyptian records, the destruction of Atlantis had taken place more than 9,000 years earlier. Since Solon lived around 600 BC, this would mean that the final destruction of Atlantis occurred approximately 10,000 BC, about 12,000 years ago from today. The priest explained, Atlantis lay not far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what is now the Strait of Gibraltar. The island was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined and served as the gateway to the many islands scattered across the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond those islands, one could reach another vast continent surrounding the Atlantic itself. Atlantis was a great land rising from the sea, yet its capital lay upon a wide level plain surrounded on three sides by mountains and open on the fourth toward the sea, sloping gently from north to south. The mountains encircled the land like a crown, forming scenery both majestic and grand. Among those mountains lay countless villages, flowing rivers, immense lakes, and endless green meadows. Those meadows provided abundant pastures for herds and contained within them countless natural resources and valuable minerals. The island's mineral wealth was immense, especially a shimmering metal they mined called orichalcum rarer and more precious than gold, regarded as the most valuable metal in the world at that time. The island also held vast forests ideal for grazing livestock and raising animals. Elephants roamed freely there, along with a great diversity of flora and fauna. These natural blessings granted by heaven were the very foundations that allowed the kingdom of Atlantis to rise to greatness. Yet beyond its natural riches, its rulers built magnificent temples, palaces, ports, and grand avenues. Gradually, they forged their island into a super empire, linking the cities of surrounding islands by bridges and harbors, uniting them as one. Within the royal palace stood temples dedicated to the gods and to their divine ancestors passed down through generations. Each structure more lavish, more refined, and more awe-inspiring than the last. In maritime construction, they dug a canal 300 feet wide, 100 feet deep, and 50 miles long, connecting the inland city to the sea. This waterway allowed ships to pass easily between the mainland and the harbors, wide enough even for the largest vessels of their age. They divided the surrounding waterways into different sections and linked the islands by bridges, leaving enough clearance for a triple-decked warship to sail beneath. Stone was the primary material used throughout Atlantis and its dependent islands. Whether for palaces or temples, every building was constructed and decorated with carefully selected stones of various colors, red, black, and white, polished and carved with meticulous care. At the ports and gateways, stone pillars were richly engraved, and such artistry was widely used across the land. Their architecture combined simplicity with elegance, often adorned with delicate carvings and intricate ornamental designs. The outer walls of many buildings were covered with what might be called a metallic armor, some plated with bronze, others with tin, and others with a blend of copper and zinc shining brilliantly under the sunlight. Atlantis was an immense and powerful center of authority. It ruled not only its own island and the neighboring territories, but extended its dominion across the sea, reaching far into the surrounding continents. The empire's influence stretched from Libya and the Pillars of Hercules to Egypt, Europe, and even parts of the Mediterranean. This vast central power expanded relentlessly, conquering the neighboring tribes one by one until the entire strait fell under the rule of the Atlantean Empire. And finally, the old priest said. Later, great earthquakes and floods struck Atlantis. In the span of a single day and night, all those proud and warlike people were swallowed by the earth, and Atlantis sank beneath the sea. Plato would later record all of this in his dialogues, weaving Solon's encounter with the Egyptian priests into a tale that was far more than history. For Plato, Atlantis was not merely a kingdom lost to the sea. It was a mirror reflecting the destiny of mankind itself. He wrote that the people of Atlantis once lived in harmony with divine law. They honored the gods, practiced virtue, and prospered under heaven's blessing. But as their power grew, so did their pride. They forgot the source of their glory, and in their arrogance, they sought to rule even the lands beyond their reach. It was then Plato said that the gods turned away, and in a single night the sea rose to reclaim what humanity had taken for granted. To Plato, the destruction of Atlantis was not just a catastrophe of nature. It was a divine reminder that no civilization, no matter how great, can survive once it loses its moral foundation. He ended his account not with despair, but with a question that still echoes across millennia. If Atlantis once fell for its pride, what of our own world? If we should forget the will of heaven? Edgar Cayce and the story of Atlantis. If the Egyptian priest's account was based purely on historical records, then certain psychics throughout history have provided us with a more vivid and experiential glimpse into Atlantis through what they described as direct recollection. Among them, the most renowned was Edgar Cayce. Often called the Sleeping Prophet, Cayce became famous for his trance readings, which revealed information about individuals, nations, future events, and even the evolution of humanity itself. He correctly predicted both World Wars, India's independence, the Great Depression of 1929, and even the establishment of the State of Israel, 15 years before it happened. Cayce also warned that racial division would bring chaos to the United States and foretold that 2 American presidents would die in office, Roosevelt and Kennedy. He passed away in 1945. But many of his predictions had already come true during his lifetime, and others were fulfilled after his death. Although widely regarded as a prophet, only a small portion of Cayce's nearly 15,000 recorded readings dealt with future events. The majority contained profound insights into ancient civilizations and the forgotten spiritual history of humankind. Cayce was particularly fascinated by Atlantis, the legendary continent said to have sunk beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Among more than 1,600 life readings he gave for individuals, over 700 people were said to have lived in Atlantis or in Lemuria in their past incarnations. In 1988, the Edgar Cayce Foundation published Edgar Cayce on Atlantis, a compilation of these trance readings made between 1924 and 1944, detailing the history and downfall of that lost civilization. According to Cayce's interpretations, Atlantis had once covered a vast region, a continent stretching from the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean in the west to the Mediterranean in the east. But as material greed increased and technology was abused, the Atlanteans brought upon themselves 3 great cataclysms. Its golden age, Cayce said, lasted from about 210,000 BC to 5722 BC, when the first great destruction took place. He described the Atlanteans as originally a peaceful people rapidly advancing both physically and spiritually. They knew, Cayce explained, that they were but part of the whole, and therefore took from nature only what was necessary for life. They could travel not only in body, but also in spirit, and astonishingly, their journeys were not limited to the 3-dimensional space of Earth. Cayce claimed that they could move their bodies from one point to another within the universe. He also spoke of the crystals of Atlantis, which served as their main source of energy. From his readings, we learned that these crystals were used for various purposes. First, the crystals were said to draw and regulate the life-giving force of the universe, extending physical longevity and helping the Atlanteans attune their minds to the original divine energy. Cayce mentioned a particular crystal system called Tuaui. In Reading 2072-10, he described it as the device that powered all forms of transportation and communication in Atlantis. During that era, he said the Atlanteans navigated air-sea and even undersea travel, using the same system and energy beam emanating from the Tuaui stone functioning as a beam of light. But over time, human ambition corrupted this technology. What had once been a source of healing and vitality became a weapon. The Tuaui crystal, later called the Firestone, was transformed into an instrument of destruction, emitting what Cayce referred to as the death ray. Eventually, the immense power of the crystal became unstable, no longer distinguishing between enemy and self. It disrupted the planet's balance, shook the continents, and triggered movements of the poles, leading to the first great destruction of Atlantis. Cayce explained. This violent upheaval came from the cooling interior of the Earth. Part of Atlantis sank beneath the ocean, where the Sargasso Sea lies today. This first cataclysm divided Atlantis into 5 islands. 21 readings placed this event around 50,000 years ago. 52 other readings referred to the second destruction occurring more than 20,000 years ago, caused by massive volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and polar shifts. After this, only 3 islands remained: Posidia, Arion, and Og. Enormous tidal waves submerged the rest. Though much of their land was gone, their advanced technology endured, and conflict, both physical and spiritual, continued to spread across the remaining lands. The final cataclysm took place around 10700 BC, when the last and largest island, Posidia, sank completely into the Atlantic Ocean. This date, Cayce noted, corresponded closely with Plato's account of Atlantis' final disappearance. From Cayce's readings, we learn that during the downfall of Atlantis, those who still believed in the divine, those who remembered the true meaning of life, were caught between the world of spirit and the world of material pleasure. The proud and the power-hungry clashed violently, and many fled to other continents, carrying with them fragments of their spiritual knowledge and their memory of God. The struggle between light and darkness raged until the ruling class of Atlantis became wholly consumed by greed and corrupted energy. Even many priests fell into the shadows. But 3 of them, Atlan Iltar and Hept-Supt, realized that the era of Atlantis was ending. They gathered their sacred records and carried them to different parts of the world. Iltar traveled to the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. Atlan hid the records in the Temple of Posidia near Bimini, and Hept-Supt brought his knowledge to Egypt. According to Cayce, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built by Atlantean refugees. It's between 10490 and 10390 B, within roughly 100 years. These survivors constructed what he called the Hall of Records, a hidden chamber containing the history and scientific achievements of Atlantis. It lies, he said, beneath a smaller pyramid, now destroyed, along the passage leading from the right paw of the Great Sphinx toward the Nile. Cayce predicted that this secret chamber would one day be discovered during a future period of great upheaval on Earth. He also claimed that the scientific and technological surge of the 20th century was largely driven by the reincarnated souls of those ancient civilizations. For example, Mitchell Hastings, a brilliant Harvard student and pioneer of FM radio technology, was said, according to Cayce's reading, to have once been an engineer who maintained the Firestone Energy Center of Atlantis. Cayce described him as a man of immense latent spiritual power. Mitchell himself later acknowledged Cayce's guidance and became one of his most dedicated supporters. But Cayce was not the only one to speak of Atlantis. Across decades and continents, others began to recall fragments of lives long buried beneath the ocean floor. Memories too vivid to be coincidence. One of them was Ingrid Bennett, who claimed to remember her past life in Atlantis. Ingrid described a vast crystal, the heart of the city, resting inside a round chamber atop a black pedestal beneath a shining crystal dome. It was, she said, the very source of power that sustained the entire Atlantean civilization. In that former life, she had been a scholar and was chosen to serve as guardian of the crystal, a high priestess of light. She said that all life in Atlantis was part of a single harmonious system, an invisible integration of every living being and every force. Each person was a part of the whole, and everyone understood that their contribution was essential to the functioning of civilization. Atlantis had flying vehicles shaped like discs. They rotated as they ascended and descended, powered by streams of air created through magnetic energy. These aircraft were mostly used for long-distance travel. For shorter journeys, the Atlanteans used small pulley-driven vehicles that could carry 2 people. Each vehicle had a motor similar to a hydrofoil, operating on the same magnetic field principles. Even goods such as food, household items, or large materials were transported in a similar way on larger transporters called subbirs, meaning subsidiary vehicles. Ingrid often communicated with dolphins through spiritual telepathy, a form of mind-to-mind and soul-level connection. She could travel by the power of thought. For example, if she wanted to go to a meadow several miles away, she would close her eyes and focus her entire mind on that place. After hearing a faint humming sound, she would open her eyes, and she was already there. She loved to be in the company of unicorns, communicating with them in the same telepathic way. In the northeastern part of Atlantis, there were vast flower fields filled with a light, soothing fragrance. Ingrid loved to sit there in meditation, feeling her spirit merge with the calm energy of nature. Atlantis also possessed an advanced communication network known as the information ships. These vessels transmitted messages to many places. Much of the information was received by wise men through telepathic attunement. They had a special capacity, much like living satellite receivers, to receive signals from afar while sitting in deep stillness. Their task was simple: to maintain perfect mental clarity in order to receive messages with absolute precision. In that civilization, there were no terminal illnesses. The average lifespan reached about 200 years. Healing methods combined many disciplines: crystals, colors, music, fragrance, and herbs, along with deep meditation. Patients were asked to meditate so that the healing energy could flow into their bodies, restoring balance between soul and flesh. Education in Atlantis began when a child was 3 years old. When both the body and mind were relaxed, knowledge flowed directly into the brain's memory center. The wise men observed and guided each child individually, discovering their gifts and nurturing them carefully. This ensured that every child had an equal chance to realize their full potential. During the stage of learning, positive thinking and higher vibrations were the focus. They believed that the higher the frequency of the body and the mind, the purer the soul became. When one's inner consciousness was positive, it reflected outward, shaping the reality around them. When two people were in complete harmony of mind and spirit, they could create a world of light together. But when two minds fell out of harmony, they were easily consumed by greed, desire, and the thirst for power. By Ingrid's time, Atlantis had reached its final age. Many people knew it, yet most chose to ignore it. The balance of material energy was collapsing. Technology had advanced so far that the Atlanteans could purify air, regulate temperature, and even alter the composition of water and the atmosphere. But their interference with nature eventually broke the divine order, leading to the continent's downfall. Ingrid said that by then, human beings no longer practiced marriage. If two people wanted to unite, they simply performed a ritual of joining. Some even crossbred humans with animals, creating half-human, half-beast creatures, such as a horse's body with a human head. Hybridization had become a success, and many engaged in it purely for pleasure. People were terrified, yet no one took action. To the Atlanteans, controlling another person's thoughts was considered barbaric, for every soul was responsible for its own spiritual evolution. However, this extreme respect for free will created a dangerous void. They could no longer restrain or punish evil. And from that silence, darkness began to spread. Those who turned away from God eventually faced his judgment. And that day finally came, the longest day, the last day, the final hour. The heavens cracked, the earth trembled. Earthquakes, volcanoes, and raging fires erupted all at once. Ingrid saw molten lava bursting everywhere, flames painting the sky in red. The earth boiled like a massive cauldron, rolling and churning like a beast devouring its prey. She fainted, and then felt her soul rise, drifting upward into the light. From above, she looked down and saw the vast continent slowly sinking beneath the ocean. Cities, temples, and crystal domes disappeared one after another beneath the waves. The sea closed over them, erasing forever a civilization that had once touched the height of glory. And thus an era of magnificence that had lasted tens of thousands of years came to an end. But perhaps Atlantis never truly vanished. When the great continent sank beneath the waves, not everything was lost. A fragment of its people, their blood, their memory, their knowledge survived. They journeyed across the seas, carrying the flame of that ancient civilization into new lands. Thousands of years later, traces of them seem to reappear. Deep within the jungles of the Americas, where Spanish explorers in the 16th century encountered strange white-skinned Indians who claimed to descend from a noble race that once lived on great islands in the middle of the ocean. And so begins another mystery, one as haunting and extraordinary as Atlantis itself. The mystery of the white-skinned Indians. If Atlantis truly vanished beneath the ocean, then could the survivors of that lost civilization still exist somewhere in our world today? In the 16th century, as Spanish explorers pushed their way through the dense tropical jungles of the Americas, they encountered something that defied all logic. Among the native tribes they found white-skinned Indians, bearded men with sharp features and deep piercing eyes. These pale Indians told the Spaniards that they were descendants of a noble and prosperous people. Many ages ago, their ancestors had lived on large islands in the middle of the ocean until a cataclysmic disaster destroyed everything. After the deluge, the survivors drifted across the sea and found refuge in the New World, where they continued to preserve the memory of the civilization they had lost. Centuries later, their story would resurface, this time in a place no less mysterious. In March of 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, despite his demanding wartime schedule, made time to meet with David and Mrs. Lamb, a couple who had just returned from an archaeological expedition in Chiapas, Mexico. The Lambs brought the president astonishing news. They had long heard rumors of a forgotten Mayan city hidden deep in the interior of Chiapas. A city said to rest atop a network of tunnels that stretched beneath the jungle floor. Their mission was to verify the truth of that legend. When they arrived, they discovered white, blue-skinned Indians guarding the entrances to the tunnels. People who, according to local lore, had been there for generations. They lived completely isolated from the outside world, guarding their sacred ground deep within the forest, a site believed to be an underground passage leading to hidden treasures. They warned the Lambs sternly to turn back immediately and leave the way they had come, as if protecting a secret far older than human memory. But the story of these tunnels didn't begin there. As far back as the 17th century, a Spanish missionary traveling through Guatemala in Central America had documented the discovery of a massive subterranean passage stretching for more than 1,000 kilometers beneath the Andes Mountains. To protect these tunnels, and to wait for a time when humanity might have the wisdom and technology to explore them, the Peruvian government later sealed the entrances, placed them under strict guard, and had them designated by UNESCO as a World Cultural Heritage Site. The German author Erich von Däniken, famous for his daring imagination, once entered one of these tunnels himself. Even he, the man who wrote of gods descending from the stars, was left in awe. He described enormous corridors with gleaming enamel walls, massive stone gateways, and intricately carved doors. The ceilings were square and polished smooth, leading into a great hall spanning over 20,000 square meters. Air vents were perfectly spaced every few meters, each about 80 centimeters wide. Inside, von Däniken found countless prehistoric artifacts, including a legendary object mentioned in ancient myths, the Golden Book. The tunnels were so vast, precise, and refined that they seemed beyond the capability of any ancient culture known to man. Von Däniken theorized that they must have been carved with superheated drills, using directed electron beam explosives technologies still far beyond modern science. He concluded, "This is not merely the greatest construction ever built. It is the greatest mystery humanity has yet to face." Among the 10 most famous lost cities on Earth, 2 lie in Peru, the world-renowned Machu Picchu, and the ancient fortress city of Cuelap in the region of Chachapoyas. Chachapoyas sits in northern Peru, high in the Andes Mountains, where the Marañón and Ucubamba rivers meet to form a vast triangular valley isolated from the rest of the world. Since the time of the Incas, legends have spoken of a mysterious white-skinned tribe living among the misty forests known as the Cloud People. They earned this name because their homeland was constantly shrouded in clouds and mist. This tribe, believed to be of pure white ancestry, included men, women, and children, all with fair complexions so striking that local records documented them as a distinct race. Sadly, by the 16th century, they had vanished, wiped out by disease and war. The historian Pietro Hiser de Leon described them in his writings. They are the fairest and most beautiful people I have ever seen. Their women are graceful and kind, many taken as wives by the Inca nobles and brought to the Temple of the Sun. They wear woolen garments and headdresses made of fine fleece, a style renowned throughout the land. The Cloud people of Chachapoyas had their own culture entirely different from that of the Incas. Even today, no one knows where they came from or when they first appeared. Their level of advancement in ancient times remains unimaginable, and the secret of their origins has been carefully guarded through the ages. And perhaps these mysterious white-skinned Indians of the Americas were none other than the last descendants of Atlantis, the ones who survived when their world sank beneath the sea. Perhaps the secret of Atlantis does not rest only in the ancient ruins or in the forgotten tunnels beneath the earth. The stories told by the white-skinned tribes of the Americas of ancestors who came from great islands in the middle of the ocean may not be mere human memory, but echoes of a far older divine legend. For in the ancient myths of Greece, passed down for thousands of years, there is a tale that speaks of this very beginning, that Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, once descended to the human world, bringing with him the wisdom of heaven. He taught the law of the divine, awakening mankind to truth and harmony. And from that teaching, he founded a glorious kingdom unlike any other in the history of the earth. The Greeks believed that it was Apollo himself in human form who became the first king of Atlantis, the one who established a great and sacred empire where men and gods walked together and the light of heaven illuminated all the lands beneath the sun. The age of Apollo and the fall of Atlantis. On the great continent of Atlantis, there once existed civilizations of extraordinary brilliance. This vast land had endured for millions of years, and throughout that time, countless civilizations rose and fell, shining like stars before fading into the eternal night. Among all those ages, one period stood above the rest, more than 10,000 years ago, remembered as the Age of the Great Apollo. It is called the Age of Apollo because the god Apollo himself was said to have descended into the human world, taking on mortal form to bring divine wisdom to mankind. He came to teach the heavenly law to humanity, to guide people to live in harmony with the laws of the universe, and to establish a sacred kingdom that united heaven and earth. His descent to enlighten humankind and restore divine order was much like how the Buddha Siddhartha Gautama later came to teach truth and open the civilization of our present age. In his earthly life, Apollo was both a scholar and a warrior, courageous, wise, and always acting in accordance with heaven's will. He defeated all the heretical tribes, united the continent, and became the first great hierarch of the world. Because he was the bringer of divine teachings, all people of that time revered and worshipped Apollo. The empire founded by Apollo was both political and spiritual. Religion guided governance, and the divine teachings replaced earthly authority. This golden era lasted through 20 generations of kings. Each ruler called himself a child of Apollo, a descendant of the god. Their science and technology were utterly different from today's. They focused on the mysteries of the human body, the unity between heaven and man, and the preservation of the divine culture passed down from the gods. Their people were known as the Anayi, meaning the race born of divine lineage. They spoke the ancient Sanskrit tongue, and their appearance resembled that of Western Europeans with fair-skinned platinum or golden hair. The men were handsome and strong, while the women were graceful, pure, and noble, much like the people of modern-day Ukraine or Belarus. They wore long robes of white or gold. The walnut blossom was chosen as their national flower. Their cities were built in the architectural style of ancient Europe, with grand palaces of gray stone carved with intricate reliefs depicting myths and heroic legends. Every region had a monumental tower about 100 meters tall. While in the great cities, some reached 200 meters sacred places where priests cultivated their spirit and observed the stars. These towers were also used for great religious ceremonies, serving as the link between heaven and earth. The age of Apollo was the peak of the divine culture of the Western white race. Other continents sent envoys to Atlantis to study its advanced knowledge. Merchants from around the world came to trade for exquisite crafts, fine textiles, medicines, herbs, and rare plants and animals to bring home. Yet something extraordinary occurred. These living beings could survive only one generation outside Atlantis. Without divine energy and the special soil of their homeland, their descendants would shrink back to their original forms. The Atlantean army under Apollo was mighty beyond imagination. They did not rely solely on weapons, but wielded spiritual power to destroy rebels and dark cults. Before battle, a great elder with immense spiritual strength would purify the field, destroying the evil spirits in other dimensions that controlled the enemy and dulling their will to fight. Then they summoned sacred beasts from higher realms, even dragons that breathed fire to attack the invisible armies of their foes, damaging their souls and leaving their physical bodies powerless. Finally, the Holy Knights would charge forward, defeating their enemies in a single battle. Their navy was equally invincible. The warships bearing the crest of Apollo sailed across all seas, and every land they reached bowed in submission. During Apollo's reign, the empire's influence extended across the world's economy. Because their culture was divinely guided, every field of society, from human knowledge and skill to the very growth of plants and animals, was blessed by the gods. Rice grains were as large as a finger. Potatoes weighed more than 2 kilograms. Horses were twice the size of modern ones, and cattle reached 900 kilograms. Their silk was light, soft, and luminous, their fabrics colorful and refined. Every piece of craftsmanship was unique, an artistic creation infused with divine culture. In medicine, the priests crafted sacred elixirs capable of healing countless diseases, and these were traded throughout the continents. The people of Atlantis held a remarkably high moral standard. Guided by faith, they lived in deep harmony with one another. They treated everyone as family, always striving to create the finest goods for others, keeping only the flawed ones for themselves. Their lives were filled with sincerity and selflessness, for they believed that the gods watched over every deed. In commerce, besides currency, they also practiced direct trade. The grand merchant ships of Apollo's empire were escorted by holy knights sailing across the world to exchange goods. All wealth belonged to the state and was used to provide social welfare for the people. In marriage, they valued pure bloodlines and forbade unions with foreign races. The nobility often arranged marriages for those of lower ranks. Atlantean women combined wisdom, beauty, and virtue. They were admired by kings and noblemen across many lands. Each newborn child was examined by a high priest who divined its destiny according to heaven's will. From this guidance, every child was raised to fulfill its innate potential and serve the nation as a person of talent and purpose. Education was universal. Religious schools existed throughout the land, divided into 3 levels. Both boys and girls studied 7 years of primary education and 5 years of secondary education. Those with exceptional ability after passing rigorous examinations could enter the Divine University. There they studied sacred scriptures and languages nearly identical to that of the celestial realms of the white race. Only priests who had reached high levels of cultivation could harness the energy to open portals of divine power. The university taught advanced spiritual arts and methods of cultivation. If ordinary people attempted to use them, their life energy would quickly be depleted and they would not survive more than 7 days. Those who graduated became guardians of truth, messengers of the gods, who carried divine teachings throughout the human world. History, in the end, is like a great play in which both you and I take part. When the music of glory reaches its height, the curtain inevitably begins to fall. Even the radiant empire of Apollo could not escape decline. As time passed, the faith of the people decayed. Religion became politics, chasing fame and power, twisting the sacred meaning of the divine. As faith fell, so too did morality. And in the end, the gods punished Atlantis. The entire continent was engulfed by cataclysm, great floods, earthquakes, and fire from the heavens. That once great civilization now rests at the bottom of the sea. Through countless cycles of rebirth, we look back today and feel as though it all happened just yesterday. So many centuries of glory and splendor, now they drift before our eyes like passing clouds, fading into eternity. But could all of this, a glorious empire, a kingdom founded by the gods, and the great cataclysm that swallowed an entire continent, truly be nothing more than a myth? Was Atlantis merely a creation of Plato's imagination? Or did it once stand as a real civilization that vanished into the long night of history? What's strange is that for thousands of years, across every corner of the world, people have uncovered traces that tell the same story of a kingdom in the middle of the ocean, destroyed in a single day and night. Ancient Egyptian records, submerged ruins beneath the Aegean Sea, mysterious stone walls in South America, and even geological data from the Atlantic Ocean all seem to point to one conclusion. Atlantis was not just a legend, it may have truly existed. Has science finally found Atlantis? For generations, humanity has asked the same question. Was Atlantis the most radiant continent ever spoken? Of a mere legend or a forgotten reality buried beneath the sea? Prophecies, archaeological discoveries, and mysterious testimonies from history now seem to converge, whispering that there may be far more truth to the story than anyone dared to believe. As mentioned earlier, the American prophet Edgar Cayce left behind nearly 15,000 readings recorded while he was in a deep trance. He possessed a gift said to reveal the past lives of individuals, the rise and fall of civilizations, and even the events that would shape humanity's future. Cayce's predictions astonished the modern world. He accurately foretold the beginning and end of both world wars, the 1929 economic collapse in the United States, India's independence, the rebirth of Israel, the assassination of an American president during his term, President Kennedy, and even the fall of the Soviet Union decades before it happened. All these prophecies, once dismissed, have since come true. But among thousands of revelations, there was one that stood apart. A prophecy that has haunted scientists ever since Cayce predicted that the lost continent of Atlantis would be discovered again in 1868. And remarkably, it all began just 1 year before. In 1967, a pilot flying over the islands of Andros and Bimini in the Bahamas spotted a massive gray geometric structure a few meters beneath the surface of the water. When archaeologists dove down to investigate, they found a thick wall-like formation that resembled the foundation of an ancient building. Then, on September 2, 1968, archaeologist J. Manson Valentine made an even more astonishing discovery just 18 feet below the northwest coast of Bimini. He found a series of perfectly squared stones, each fitted tightly together as if forming a great road. These blocks, bound with a cement-like substance, measured about 16 cubic feet each and weighed over 25 tons. This structure became known as the Bimini Wall, or the Bimini Road, one of the most controversial archaeological findings ever linked to Atlantis. The massive stone formations beneath the Atlantic left scientists astonished. But even more remarkable was that Edgar Cayce had predicted all of this decades earlier. When asked about the location of Atlantis, Cayce described 3 distinct phases in its geological history: more than 100,000 years ago, around 28,000 years ago, and again about 12,000 years ago. Each period, he said, marked a shift caused by earthquakes and the slow movement of Earth's crust, what modern science now calls plate tectonics. According to Cayce, one of Atlantis's greatest cities was known as Posidia. Situated in the Caribbean, specifically near what we now know as the Bimini Islands of the Bahamas, just below Florida and north of Cuba. In 1940, he prophesied that Posidia would reappear in the late 1960s along with its temples and ancient monuments buried beneath the sea. And astonishingly, just over 2 decades later, his prophecy began to unfold. During his lifetime, Cayce and his followers established a spiritual research organization known as the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE. The group preserved thousands of his trance readings, explored spiritual healing, and offered advanced teachings on consciousness and past lives. Over the years, many expeditions were launched in search of Atlantis, but none gained as much attention as the discoveries made in Bimini. In 1968, a massive underwater stone path was discovered off the coast of Bimini, and since then, countless submerged formations have been revealed in the surrounding area. Between 1998 and 2007, the ARE funded several expeditions using satellite imaging and sonar scanning to map the region. While diving along the Bimini Stone Road, archaeologists William Donato and Michael Potaman, accompanied by a sonar team, made a discovery that shook them to the core. On the sonar image beneath roughly 130 feet of water appeared what looked like an entire complex of stone buildings, strikingly similar to the ruins found on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. These structures, complete with stairways, entrances, and pillars, resembled the puke-style pyramids of the ancient Maya. In interviews, William Donato admitted he was astonished by the architectural resemblance between the underwater formations and the ancient Mayan temples. Further exploration was needed, but the enormous cost of deep-sea research has long delayed future dives. Still, the evidence gathered suggested something extraordinary, that the civilizations of Atlantis and the Maya may have been connected. After the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, Earth experienced a global cataclysm now known as the Younger Dryas event. A series of comet impacts and massive floods reshaped the planet's surface, altered global temperatures, and wiped out most ancient civilizations. Strangely, this time frame aligns almost perfectly with Cayce's description of Atlantis's destruction. It is now believed that the fall of Atlantis may have been triggered by massive crustal shifts, tsunamis, and rising sea levels that submerged vast portions of land beneath the ocean, a cataclysm that reset the face of the Earth itself. Many researchers today believe that the Maya civilization could be the direct descendants of Atlantis. In countless Mayan cities across Central America, excavations have revealed older, more advanced layers of construction beneath the visible temples, suggesting that the Maya inherited their knowledge from a lost parent civilization. Some of the oldest Mayan pyramids are far more intricate and technologically sophisticated than those built later. It's as if a great disaster, a flood, an earthquake, or the shifting of continents had erased much of their ancestral wisdom, forcing survivors to begin anew with simpler tools and fragmented memory. And perhaps in their temples, carvings, and mysterious glyphs, the Maya left behind encrypted messages, silent echoes from their ancestors in Atlantis etched into stone to reach us across the Gulf of Time. Soon after, researchers began finding even more stone structures beneath the Atlantic walls. Roadways, collapsed gates, and what appeared to be piers and temples. Together, they formed the outline of a vast port city long lost to the waves. Their layout was strikingly similar to the Stonehenge pillars in England and the Cyclopean stone walls of Peru. Fossilized mangrove roots found embedded in the stone dated the site to roughly 12,000 years ago, astonishingly close to the time Plato described Atlantis' destruction. These ruins had endured the erosion of countless tides and storms, yet still stood proud and imposing with wide, level avenues of cut stone. Many scholars believe they are the surviving remnants of the legendary civilization of Atlantis. Even more astonishingly, Cayce's prophecies about Atlantis seem to be echoed by a strange event nearly 20 years after his death. The British newspaper The Sun once reported a sensational story. During a Soviet mission to locate a missing nuclear warhead off the coast of Cuba, a Soviet research vessel allegedly captured a mysterious half-human, half-fish being deep beneath the sea. On board was Dr. Vladimir Vinogradov, a respected scientist. In his memoir, Dr. Vinogradov described how, as they lowered a camera to the seafloor, a small dark figure suddenly appeared on screen. Everyone froze in disbelief. The creature looked like a child, its skin covered with scales, its eyes luminous and human-like. It swam toward the lens, paused, stared directly into it with a curious, almost playful gaze, and then vanished. Shaken, the crew set up a trap to capture the being alive. Hours later, they succeeded. It was only about 2 feet long, covered in greenish scales, and wore what seemed to be a bone-like cap on its head. When it was brought above the water, it made sounds like a dolphin, and then, to everyone's astonishment, it spoke in perfect human language. "I am from Atlantis. Please let me go." Vinogradov later wrote that his knees nearly gave out when he heard it. For hours they conversed with the creature, who agreed to answer any question. On one condition: it must be released back into the sea. It warned them, "If you break your promise, a great disaster will come upon your land." The being claimed that millions of years ago, Atlantis stretched from Africa to South America, but gradually sank beneath the ocean. To survive, the descendants of the Atlanteans evolved gills and scales, adapting to life underwater. Their average lifespan was over 300 years, and their population numbered around 3 million, living in cities of marble and coral beneath the sea. It also revealed that some Atlanteans occasionally take human form and walk among us to observe modern civilization's progress. But the Soviet authorities broke their promise. They took the creature to a secret facility on the Black Sea for study, and it never spoke again. Shortly afterward, as if by coincidence, the Soviet Union began its decline and finally collapsed. Some say it was just coincidence. Others believe it was the curse of Atlantis fulfilled. Ancient prophets and modern visionaries alike, from Plato to Cayce, have spoken of wondrous structures beneath the sea, of cities built from impossible stone, and of beings who remember the world before the flood. Together, their words form a pattern too precise to ignore. Atlantis was real, it was powerful, and it was destroyed. Yet beyond the ruins, the story carries a warning. When humanity becomes obsessed with the material world and forgets the spiritual, when morality crumbles and desire replaces faith, when technology outpaces conscience, the end is no longer a matter of if, but when. And perhaps, just like the people of Atlantis, we too are walking once more toward the same fate. But Atlantis was not the only civilization to vanish. When we look back through the long river of history, a chilling truth begins to emerge. What happened to the Atlanteans has happened many times before on this very earth. Whenever humanity's morality decays, when faith in the divine is replaced by pride, when knowledge is twisted to serve greed and desire, the light of heaven withdraws and darkness takes its place. From the fires that consumed Sodom and Gomorrah to the molten ash that buried Pompeii, from the great floods that swallowed Lemuria to the cities that vanished without a trace. Mohenjo-Daro, Troy, Helike. Each was once radiant, each was erased in an instant. And in every story the pattern is the same: the fall of man, followed by the judgment of God. The glorious empire of Babylon. Why did it fall in just one night? Throughout human history, there have been civilizations so radiant, so magnificent, that they seem destined to last forever, only to vanish in the blink of an eye. And Babylon, the shining jewel of Mesopotamia, was one of them. Beneath the vast heavens, Babylon once stood as one of the most powerful and resplendent empires ever known to mankind. It was a kingdom where gold and silver were not only used for adornment, but paved the very roads. where palaces rose out of the desert sands like sunlight made stone eternal blazing and proud. More than 2,600 years ago, between the fertile rivers of the Euphrates and Tigris, a legendary empire was born. It flourished upon the life-giving currents of these two mighty rivers, its lands abundant, its gardens evergreen, its markets overflowing with spices, silks, gemstones, and treasures brought by merchants from the ends of the earth. The city walls of Babylon were said to be so tall that when you stood at their base, you could not see their top. Each brick shimmered blue with glazed enamel inlaid with images of lions, bulls, and dragons, the sacred beasts of Babylon, symbols of divine power and conquest. At its grand entrance stood the Ishtar Gate, adorned with hundreds of golden reliefs shining so brilliantly that when the sunlight struck, the entire city seemed to burn with glory. Inside those walls stretched a world of splendor. The streets were paved with white and rose-colored marble, leading all the way to the royal palace. On either side stood workshops, bazaars, and temples, sheathed in gold, where traders from Arabia, Egypt, Persia, and India bartered their finest treasures. The air was thick with the scent of incense and myrrh, and the sounds of music, voices, and temple bells echoed day and night. At the city's heart, colossal towers reached toward the heavens, symbols of humanity's bond with the gods. Atop them, priests prayed and watched the stars, interpreting the will of heaven. In the distance rose the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a marvel that defied the limits of ancient engineering. Tier upon tier of lush greenery floated in the air with sparkling streams, cascading from above, creating a vision so enchanting that even the ancients believed it to be divine. On nights when the moonlight fell upon the Euphrates, its waters reflected the glowing towers like liquid silver. From the palace halls drifted the faint sound of harps and voices, a lullaby for a city that believed it had touched the very boundary of heaven itself. Babylon ushered in a golden age, an era where opulence, power, and pride became one, where faith in human greatness grew so absolute that people forgot there was still a creator above. This was the Neo-Babylonian Empire, 626 to 539 BC. The brightest jewel of Mesopotamian civilization, home to one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. The Greek historian Herodotus once marveled, "In size and splendor, no other city on earth can compare to Babylon." The man who brought Babylon to such heights was King Nebuchadnezzar II, the greatest ruler of Mesopotamia. To him, no enemy was unconquerable, no dream too grand, no horizon too distant. Under his reign, Babylon was more than a nation, it became the center of the civilized world. He built grand palaces and magnificent temples, transforming Babylon into a city of divine majesty and human ambition. Out of love for his wife, Ammonitis, who longed for the green hills of her homeland, Nebuchadnezzar built the Hanging Gardens, a paradise in the air forever remembered as one of humanity's greatest creations. The wealth of Babylon was beyond imagination. It was called the Garden of the Gods in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and the Bible referred to it as the proud heart of mankind. Surrounded by two massive walls and protected by a deep moat fed from the Euphrates, Babylon seemed impenetrable. Its streets gleamed beneath the sun, and at its core stood a 91-meter tower built in 7 layers of colored bricks, believed by many to be the legendary Tower of Babel, where humankind once sought to reach heaven itself. With such splendor, Babylon became the symbol of absolute power, pride, and the illusion of immortality. But greatness often breeds arrogance. Nebuchadnezzar conquered countless kingdoms, including Jerusalem, the sacred city of the Israelites. He destroyed their holy temple, enslaved tens of thousands, and mocked their faith. That dark era became known as the Babylonian captivity, a wound that forever scarred the Jewish people. To them, Babylon was not a paradise, it was hell on earth. They were forced to bow before golden idols, and those who refused were thrown into the fiery furnace. Yet even in suffering, many held fast to their faith in God, choosing death over betrayal. Meanwhile, Babylon's prosperity became its curse. As wealth and desire ruled men's hearts, morality began to decay. The city became a den of indulgence, corruption, and sin. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is described as the great city, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. A dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every impure spirit, when humanity no longer distinguishes between good and evil. When pride blinds them to heaven's authority, the wheel of fate begins to turn. In 538 BC, Belshazzar, the arrogant grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, held the throne. As the Persian army led by Cyrus the Great approached the city, Belshazzar did not prepare for battle. Instead, he threw a grand feast for 1,000 nobles, drinking from the gold and silver cups his grandfather had stolen from the Temple of Jerusalem, mocking the God of Israel. In the midst of his drunken revelry, a hand appeared from the shadows and wrote on the palace wall, "Your kingdom has been weighed and found wanting. Your end has come." But the king did not repent. That very night, as Babylon slept under the haze of wine and pride, the Persians diverted the Euphrates River, creating a dry passage beneath the walls. Through the unlocked gates, they entered silently. No resistance, no battle. By dawn, the mighty empire of Babylon was no more. As the scriptures declared, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons and every unclean spirit." Cyrus the Great, upon conquering the city, showed mercy to the Jewish captives, setting them free, restoring their treasures and allowing them to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. His empire would endure for over 2 centuries, and to this day, the Persian people revere him as the father of the nation. Thus ended the story of Babylon, the empire that once believed it could rival heaven itself. Historians say it fell because of poor leadership and arrogance. But perhaps in a deeper sense, Babylon perished because it turned its back on virtue, lost its humility, and defied the will of God. For no matter how wealthy or powerful any nation or any person that suppresses faith and mocks the divine will eventually face the same fate. And yet, as history shows, those who honor truth, righteousness, and the believers of God like Cyrus the Great will be remembered for eternity. This is the lesson Babylon left for humankind. Only when we respect faith, protect righteousness, and live with reverence toward heaven can we escape destruction. And so, after the fall of Babylon, history turned its wheel once more. New empires rose from the ashes, inheriting the splendor of those before them. Yet none could escape the law of heaven. From the blazing east to the mighty west, humanity repeated the same tragic pattern. When power and pride outgrew virtue, destruction would follow, silent, inevitable, and absolute. But this time, the downfall did not come through swords or floods. It came from something unseen, something so small that no human eye could perceive it. It was a terrible plague, a mysterious disease that brought the mighty Roman Empire to its knees. An empire that had once ruled the known world with iron discipline and divine authority was undone not by an enemy army, but by the frailty of the human soul itself. The terrifying mystery of the disease that brought down the mighty Roman Empire. When we speak of the greatest civilizations ever to exist, few names shine brighter than the Roman Empire, the very symbol of power, order, and absolute prosperity. For centuries, Rome was known as the heart of the world, the place where, as the saying went, all roads lead to Rome. From a small city-state on the banks of the Tiber River, Rome rose to become an empire that ruled nearly the entire known world. At its height, Roman legions marched across half of Europe, parts of North Africa, and deep into the Middle East, the lands we now know as Turkey and Iraq. The Romans boasted with pride that the Mediterranean Sea is nothing more than our private lake. In 27 BC, when Emperor Augustus ascended the throne, the Golden Age of Rome began. Under his rule, the world entered an era known as Pax Romana, the Roman peace which lasted for over 2 centuries. It was a time when power, art, architecture, and science reached heights the world had never seen before. At its peak, the empire covered more than 6.5 million square kilometers, stretching across 54 modern nations and home to over 88 million people. Marble-paved roads connected its city's enormous arenas were built, where men fought to the death for glory. And white marble temples gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. The Colosseum was not merely an arena. It was a symbol of Roman pride, a place where blood and honor became entertainment, where the roar of the crowd echoed like thunder across the empire. The Pantheon, the Arch of Titus, and the vast public baths adorned with gold, silver, and turquoise mosaics all stood as monuments to human ambition and divine arrogance. The Roman elite lived in palaces lined with marble statues dined on golden plates and drank from silver goblets. They sipped wine infused with rose petals, seasoned every dish with honey, and bathed in perfumed water mixed with olive oil. During lavish feasts, thousands of rose petals were scattered on the floors, while slaves fanned their masters with peacock feathers. Music, laughter, and the clinking of jewels filled the air until dawn. But as Rome reached the very height of its glory, the seeds of its destruction had already been sown. For when men become too enchanted by the pleasures of the flesh, they forget reverence for the divine. Morality decays, compassion fades. And when the rich begin to mock the poor to use human suffering as amusement, then even the gods will no longer forgive. This time, however, the punishment did not come from war or flood. It came from something far more insidious: lead poisoning. The very metal that Romans praised as a mark of progress, luxury, and civilization would ultimately destroy them. For centuries, lead was used everywhere, in wine goblets, water pipes, cooking pots, and even cosmetics. Noble women painted their faces with white lead powder to appear pale and refined, while chefs used lead pans to sweeten wine, never realizing that each drop was slowly poisoning their bodies. When lead combined with carbonic acid in drinks, it formed lead carbonate, a deadly toxin that dissolved in water, entered the bloodstream, and silently destroyed the nervous system. The entire empire was affected, but none more than the nobility. They lived in luxury, bathed in lead-contaminated water, and drank toxic wine daily. Studies show that members of the upper class suffered from chronic illness, mental instability, and died young. The average lifespan of a Roman aristocrat was only 25 years. Even the emperors themselves were not spared. Historical records describe Emperor Claudius, who ruled from AD 41-54, as severely poisoned by lead. He stammered. When he spoke, his limbs trembled. His gait was awkward, his mind erratic, and his mouth constantly drooled. Later, emperors were said to suffer from insanity, plunging the empire into chaos. The common people, though, less exposed to luxury goods, were also victims. They drank water flowing through lead pipes or from the Tiber River, which was sacred to Rome, but contaminated with lead levels over 100 times higher than safe limits. Every sip of water, every breath, every cup of wine slowly turned Rome, the mightiest empire on earth, into a giant body, poisoning itself from within. An old legend tells of the day when a flock of geese saved Rome. Their cries warned of an enemy attack, allowing the city to defend itself. But in the end, Rome's true enemy did not come from outside its walls. It came from within, from the very substance they had once hailed as a symbol of civilization. And so the empire that once ruled the world fell not by sword or fire, but by an invisible poison, a silent disease born from its own hands. Rome fell undone by the very luxury and poison it had created. A civilization that slowly destroyed itself through pride and indulgence. But history, it seems, did not begin nor end there. Long before Rome ever rose, there was another city, one that too had shone with wealth, beauty, and splendor, only to be burned to ashes in a single instant. If the Roman Empire perished from the decay of the body, then this city was destroyed because of the corruption of the human soul. That city was Sodom, the place the Bible calls the city of sin, where God himself rained down fire and brimstone to cleanse the earth of its wickedness. How the corrupt city of Sodom was destroyed. Although countless religious texts describe how God rained down fire from heaven to annihilate the two ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, many have long dismissed it as nothing more than myth or legend. Yet in October 2015, archaeologists announced a discovery that shook the world. They believed they had finally found the ruins of Sodom, the very city of debauchery described in the Bible. At Tal el-Hammam, in modern-day Jordan, researchers uncovered an archaeological site whose location artifacts and estimated age matched precisely the biblical description of Sodom. The excavation revealed a city blanketed in a thick layer of ash between 4 and 20 inches deep. Laboratory tests showed the ash contained calcium sulfate and calcium carbonate compounds formed when limestone and sulfur burn at extremely high temperatures. That infernal heat had vaporized everything: humans, animals, and buildings, turning the entire city into dust within moments. Scattered throughout the ruins were chunks of burned sulfur. Normally, sulfur generated by geothermal activity contains only about 30 to 40% pure sulfur. But the sulfur found here contained 96 to 98% purity, capable of producing extreme temperatures when ignited. This detail aligned eerily with the biblical account that the Lord rained fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah, reducing them to ashes. Scientists proposed that perhaps a meteorite had exploded over the city, releasing an intense burst of heat that obliterated everything in an instant. Regardless of the cause, about 3,700 years ago, two cities perished beneath a force so powerful and unnatural that it matched perfectly the description of divine judgment recorded in Scripture. The Bible recounts that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were so grave that God resolved to destroy them. When Abraham, the forefather of both Jews and Arabs, learned of this, he pleaded with God 6 times. "If there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you spare it?" And God in his mercy agreed. Abraham continued to plead for 45, for 40, 30, 20, even 10 righteous souls, and each time God promised that if 10 could be found, he would not destroy the city. So one evening, God sent 2 angels to see with their own eyes what humanity had become in Sodom. One evening, Lot, Abraham's nephew, who lived in Sodom, was sitting by the city gate when 2 angels appeared before him, taking the form of ordinary men. Lot knew all too well how the people of Sodom treated strangers. They mocked them, threatened them, and often harmed them cruelly. So he bowed down low to the ground and pleaded with them to stay at his home for the night. Lot, being courteous and kind, prepared a generous meal for his guests. But word of the strangers quickly spread throughout the city. The men of Sodom, driven by perverse desires, came to Lot's house and banged on his door, shouting, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we may have our way with them." Lot stepped outside and pleaded with them, "My brothers, I beg you, do not commit this wickedness. Please do not harm these men. I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. Let me bring them out to you instead." But the men of Sodom cursed him, shouting, "Stand back! Who are you to judge us, you foreigner? You think you rule over us? We'll treat you worse than them." As they lunged forward to break down the door, the 2 angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and struck the mob with blindness. The men outside stumbled in confusion, groping for the door but unable to find it, until finally they gave up and dispersed. The 2 heavenly messengers had seen enough. They knew Lot was a righteous man, and that not even 9 other just souls could be found in that city. Revealing their true forms, the angels said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons, daughters, sons-in-law, or anyone else in the city? Take them out of this place, for we are about to destroy it. The outcry against its wickedness has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it." Lot hurried to warn his sons-in-law, "Get up, leave this city. The Lord is about to destroy this place." But they laughed, thinking he was joking. They dismissed his warning and refused to move. At dawn, the angels urged Lot to flee. Taking hold of Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters, they led them out of the city, saying, "Run for your lives. Do not look back. Flee to the mountains, and do not stop anywhere on the plain." But as they escaped, Lot's wife looked back. perhaps longing for her home or her possessions, and at that moment she was engulfed by the rising fire and turned into a pillar of salt, standing forever as a warning near the Dead Sea. Then the Lord rained down fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The entire plain, along with its people, livestock, and every plant was consumed in an instant. Today those cities lie in ruins near the Dead Sea, their ashes buried beneath the earth, and the great salt pillars still stand as silent witnesses of divine wrath. But what truly led to this destruction? The people of Sodom lived in fertile lands, prosperous and wealthy. They ate well-traded, endlessly built lavish homes, and enjoyed every pleasure. Their abundance bred arrogance and lust, drowning them in indulgence and moral decay. God saw the wickedness within their hearts, their violent, perverse, and unrestrained desires. Their sins had piled up to heaven, and at last His judgment came. Though God is merciful and had promised Abraham that He would spare the city if 10 righteous people could be found, there was none but Lot. Even the messengers of heaven became targets of their violence. Lot, once respected for his wisdom and fairness, had often tried to mediate disputes among the people. But instead of gratitude, they mocked him and sought to violate his home. And so the Lord's judgment descended upon that depraved city. From that time onward, the name Sodom became synonymous with sin and corruption. Many in the modern age claim that such acts are not wrong, that morality is subjective. But Scripture is clear: to live in defiance of the divine order established by God is sin. When people indulge their lusts without restraint or reverence, they turn themselves into slaves of desire, and in the eyes of heaven that is evil, and its result can only be punishment. Some still argue, surely not everyone in Sodom was wicked. Should the good suffer with the evil? But such reasoning often hides self-deception. People like to think, I don't steal or hurt others. I just live for myself, enjoying what I earn. What sin is that? Yet the destruction of Sodom stands as a warning. It was not merely because of lust or violence, but because the people had abandoned God altogether. They mocked Him, blasphemed Him, and reveled in shameless depravity. They had lost compassion, oppressed the weak, and silenced righteousness. When Lot was threatened, none defended him. They rejected every chance for mercy, turning away from their final opportunity for salvation. Thus, God's destruction of Sodom was an act of divine justice, a declaration that good and evil will never be confused. It remains a warning to all generations. When people stray too far from God, losing their moral compass and rejecting truth, destruction will follow. Today, humanity enjoys comfort and luxury beyond imagination. Yet many are consumed by indulgence and lust, pursuing fleeting pleasures. Modern society glorifies immorality, casual relationships, adultery, sexual liberation, and homosexuality, declaring them acceptable in the name of freedom. But even if the world approves what happens, if God does not, when a nation mocks heaven, ridicules faith as superstition, and celebrates what is vile as culture, how far are we from Sodom? When injustice reigns, when the righteous are silenced and the majority turn away, in fear, how long before judgment arrives? Jesus once told His disciple, "Truly, I tell you, on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than for that city." Some say, I only believe in myself. I don't believe in what I can't see. But when Judgment Day comes, can you save yourself? Before every great catastrophe, God sends warnings. Only those who keep faith and goodness in their hearts will be saved. Remember Lot's wife, who disobeyed the angel's command not to look back. Perhaps she longed for her possessions or feared the unknown, and thus she turned into a pillar of salt. And so Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. This is a lesson for all humanity. If one refuses to trust and obey God, if one cannot let go of worldly attachments, then when the day of destruction comes, they too will perish just as the city of Sodom did. Gomorrah, the forgotten city of fire and judgment. Alongside Sodom, Gomorrah was once a shining jewel on the fertile plain. But when wealth blinded the hearts of men and laughter mocked morality, instead of joining in prayer, heaven's judgment had already begun. The two cities stood side by side on the rich plains south of the Dead Sea where the Jordan River meets its end. It was a land of abundance, lush trees, flowing waters, and fields that never withered yet. That very prosperity made its people arrogant, indulgent, and forgetful of the one who had given them everything. The people of Gomorrah lived in opulence, intoxicated by pleasure and ambition. They built grand temples, held banquets that lasted through the night, worshipped gods of the flesh, and mocked the notion of virtue. No one felt shame for their sins. Lust, greed, betrayal, and violence became the customs of daily life. If in Sodom sin was seen in action, in Gomorrah it seeped into the soul. They not only did evil, they celebrated it, calling corruption freedom and indulgence civilization. Children grew up learning to ridicule faith. The elders forgot the moral laws of their ancestors, and the entire city sank into the darkness of disbelief. When fire fell from the heavens, Gomorrah had no time to realize that its end had come. In that final blinding moment, people still danced, sang, and raised their cups of wine until the light turned into a sea of fire that swallowed everything. The whole plain blazed red. The cries of men merged with the roaring wind, the crackling flames, and the collapse of once proud temples. Today, archaeologists who venture to the southern shores of the Dead Sea still find layers of ash nearly a foot thick, half-melted sulfur balls with burn marks, and pillars of salt standing silently in the desert, believed to be the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. These two cities were once symbols of prosperity and power. But when humanity turns its back on morality and the Creator himself, no civilization, no matter how magnificent, can escape divine judgment. The fall of Gomorrah is a warning that echoes through every age. When hearts grow cold, when sin becomes law, when virtue is mocked, that is the moment heaven's fire has already reached the city gates. Throughout human history, there have always been two kinds of destruction. One comes as divine punishment, when humanity crosses the moral boundaries set by heaven, as in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities consumed by fire from the wrath of God. The other comes from the hands of mankind itself, when pride, deceit, and arrogance corrode the soul, and a civilization collapses not by fate, but by its own doing. If Sodom and Gomorrah perished because of sin and corruption, then Troy fell because of human pride and deceit, a tragedy that still echoes across millennia. For sometimes the greatest enemy of mankind is not the one who stands before the gates, but the pride that lives within the human heart. And the story of Troy is the clearest reminder of that truth. Troy, the fall born of human pride and deception. Over 200 years ago, on the western coast of Asia Minor, in what is now modern-day Turkey, there stood a city so magnificent it seemed invincible. That city was Troy, the jewel of the ancient world, the crossroads between East and West, where ships from Greece, Egypt, Babylon, and Anatolia docked day and night, carrying gold, spices, and treasures from across the known world. With its strategic position controlling the maritime routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, Troy was more than a prosperous trading center. It was the Golden Gate of civilizations. Ancient Greek historians once wrote, "The walls of Troy rise high enough to touch the clouds, and gold and silver fill the palace of King Priam." The city was encircled by towering stone walls over 15 meters high, and so thick that they were said to be unbreachable. Inside lay wide marble avenues, grand temples devoted to the Olympian gods, and bustling markets brimming with bronze, gold, and exotic incense from the east. The Trojans lived in wealth and confidence, believing that the gods themselves had chosen them to rule the Aegean. But as with all civilizations that reach the height of glory, when pride fills the hearts of men, the shadow of destruction is never far behind. According to Greek legend, Prince Paris of Troy, son of King Priam, traveled to Sparta where he met Helen. The woman hailed as the most beautiful in the world and the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris fell deeply in love, and defying reason and consequence took Helen back to Troy. That single act ignited one of the greatest wars ever told, the Trojan War. Humiliated and enraged, Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, summoned an alliance of over 1,000 ships and tens of thousands of soldiers from across Greece to lay siege to Troy. Among them were legendary warriors Achilles, Odysseus, and Ajax, heroes whose very names struck fear into the hearts of enemies. The war dragged on for 10 long years, 10 years of blood and tears. Summer after summer, wave after wave of Greek armies fell before the city walls, while inside King Priam and his people believed the gods would never abandon them. But when humans begin to think themselves invincible, they forget destruction often comes from within. After a decade of futile fighting, the Greeks devised a plan, a deception that would end an empire. They built a colossal wooden horse, pretending to withdraw, leaving it behind as an offering to the goddess Athena. The Trojans, believing the war was finally over, rejoiced. They opened the gates, dragged the horse into the heart of the city, and celebrated their victory. Yet hidden inside the hollow beast was a squad of elite Greek soldiers waiting for nightfall. That night, under the pale light of the moon, as the city echoed with music and drunken laughter, a hatch opened in the horse's belly. The Greek warriors slipped out, killed the guards, and flung open the gates for the waiting army outside. Moments later, Troy erupted in flames. The fire devoured everything: temples, palaces, and the pride of men. King Priam was slain before the altar of the gods. The Trojan warriors fell one by one, while Helen, the woman whose beauty had started it all, stood amid the ashes weeping for a love that had consumed an entire civilization. When dawn broke, Troy was no more. Its mighty walls lay in ruins, its gold and silver reduced to ash, and the Greek ships had long sailed away, leaving behind a wasteland of silence and smoke. Over 3 millennia later, when archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann excavated the site of Hisarlik in modern Turkey, he uncovered 9 layers of cities built atop one another. One layer bore clear signs of fire and destruction dating precisely to the era described in Homer's Iliad. Shattered pottery, charred human remains, and bronze weapons embedded in the walls, all evidence that Troy was real. Troy was not destroyed by Greek strength, but by its own pride and arrogance. The Trojans believed their power and cunning placed them above the will of the gods, and that hubris became the key that opened their gates to ruin. Troy did not fall because of war. Troy fell because of pride, deception, and the forgetting of divine law. After Troy fell in the flames of war and deceit, humanity thought it had learned its lesson about arrogance. Yet only a few centuries later, history repeated itself, this time not in the clash of swords, but in the terrifying silence of nature. If in Troy mankind destroyed itself through deceit, then in Helike it brought destruction upon itself by defying the divine. No armies attacked, no enemies besieged the walls, only the sea, the earth, and the wrath of Poseidon. A city that once worshipped the god of the sea, that believed it would be protected forever. In a single night, it was swallowed by the very ocean it adored and vanished forever from the map of mankind. Helike, the city that vanished in a single night. Over 400 years ago, on the northern coast of Achaea in ancient Greece, there stood a magnificent city, often called the heart of the Peloponnese. This was Helike, capital of the Achaean League, a radiant center of trade, religion, and science, where people believed that the sea god Poseidon watched over them. Helike was famed not only for its wealth, but also for its holiness. The citizens worshipped Poseidon, the god of the seas, earthquakes, and storms. At the heart of the city stood a massive bronze temple with a statue of Poseidon rising 15 meters high, holding his shining trident that glimmered beneath the sun. Each year, thousands from across Greece would gather for the festival of Poseidia, offering gifts and prayers for calm waters, bountiful harvests, and divine protection. But the city blessed by the god of the sea would soon become the victim of his fury. And it was human arrogance that provoked the punishment to come. Ancient records tell us that one day, the people of Helike grew so prideful that they drove away visitors from Ionia, poor travelers who came seeking permission to build their own temple to Poseidon. The Helikeans believed that only they were worthy of worshiping the god. Not only did they refuse, but they also robbed the Ionians and cast them out in cruelty. And when man insults the divine, retribution always follows. On a quiet winter night in 373 BC, under a calm sky and gentle sea breeze, the earth began to shake violently. The first tremors toppled the walls. Before anyone could react, the ground split open beneath their feet, swallowing houses, temples, and people alive. Moments later, a massive tsunami surged from the Corinthian Gulf, crashing into the coast and wiping away everything that remained. In an instant, the glorious city of Helike, the pride of an entire region, was gone, swallowed by the sea, and buried beneath the waves of the Corinthian Gulf. Survivors recalled that at sunrise, nothing remained but shimmering water and the wreckage of rooftops, beams, and lifeless bodies drifting with the tide. Helike had vanished overnight, as if it had never existed. The tragedy was documented by many ancient witnesses, including Aristotle Strabo and Pausanias. Aristotle wrote, "Helike sank into the sea in a single night, along with all its people and its temples. Even years later, sailors could still see the city's rooftops through the clear waters." Greek sailors whispered that on calm nights, if they anchored near that place, they could still hear dogs, barking roosters crowing, and faint bells ringing from beneath the waves. Fishermen swore they saw the bronze temple of Poseidon glimmering faintly under the sea, a divine warning, preserved for the generations to come. Helike became a symbol of both prosperity and divine retribution, often called the Atlantis of Greece. Scholars believe that the destruction of Helike may have inspired Plato's tale of Atlantis, written only a few years later. Centuries passed, and Helike faded into myth until 2001, when archaeologists in Greece uncovered its true remains buried beneath the mud of the Aegeo Plain, just a few hundred meters from the Corinthian coast. They found the foundations of ancient buildings, stone-paved roads, pottery coins, and temple columns still darkened by fire. Everything matched the ancient accounts, proving that Helike had indeed existed and had truly disappeared in a single night. Today, when people gaze upon the calm waters of the Corinthian Gulf, they still speak in hushed tones, saying that beneath the blue waves lies the place where Poseidon's wrath once fell. And when the wind howls and the sea rises, they believe it is the voice of Helike, echoing one eternal warning to mankind. When humans forget reverence for the divine, when pride replaces gratitude, then one single night is enough to erase an entire civilization. If Helike was the warning of the sea, then Pompeii was the scream of the earth. From ancient Greece to mighty Rome, humanity continued to repeat the same mistake, believing it could command nature, defy heaven's will, and live without moral restraint, yet never face the price. Helike was swallowed by the sea. But Pompeii, the shining jewel beneath Mount Vesuvius, was buried beneath fire and ash on a day when the sky itself turned into hell. It is no coincidence that these two cities, separated by more than 1,000 years, shared the same fate. Both were prosperous, opulent, and proud, and both were erased in a single night. For when mankind forgets reverence for the divine, no mountain is high enough, no ocean deep enough to escape the judgment of heaven. And thus begins the story of Pompeii, the city forever frozen in the moment of divine reckoning. Pompeii, a warning about the moral corruption of humankind. In the spring of 1748 in southern Italy, a farmer named Andre was digging in his vineyard. The blade of his hoe suddenly struck something hard, like stone, and no matter how hard he pulled, he could not lift it out. He called his brother and sister-in-law for help. Together they dug deeper and discovered a metal chest buried beneath the ground. When they opened the chest, they were shocked at what they saw inside: a heap of melted gold and silver jewelry and ancient coins, as if they had once been burned in a great fire. No one could have imagined that this small discovery in a vineyard would lead to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. They had found the ancient city of Pompeii, once brilliant, lively, and full of life, now completely buried in volcanic ash. More than 1,600 years earlier, on August 24th, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted in southern Italy. Rivers of ash and mud buried 3 nearby towns, the city of Pompeii and the wealthy coastal town of Herculaneum, near Pompeii. At that moment, the lava came so suddenly that it instantly buried the entire city of Pompeii beneath the ground. When excavations began centuries later, archaeologists could not have expected what they would find beneath the earth. According to their accounts, as they dug deeper, they discovered spaces or cavities under the ground. They wondered what these could be as they kept finding one hollow after another, some even connecting together. What were they? One man then had an idea. He mixed lime with water to form a liquid plaster and poured it into the cavities. When the plaster hardened, he carefully removed the surrounding soil, and the result left everyone horrified. Before their eyes were human remains, still frozen in their final moments. Some clasped their heads with both hands, some curled up tightly, some sat in agony. There were even slaves chained by their masters, unable to escape as disaster descended, forced to sit and await death. According to historians, the earthquakes lasted for several days. Because seismic activity was common in the area, there had been no preparation at all for such an eruption. One of the survivors was Pliny the Younger, who was only 18 at the time. That event would begin his writing career. He witnessed the eruption from across the Bay of Naples and recorded every detail in a letter he sent to the Roman historian Tacitus. He wrote, "A huge cloud shaped like a pine tree suddenly appeared on the horizon, and a great fire broke out. The sky turned dark and gloomy, and the flames seemed even brighter. The ground shook continuously, and we were too terrified to go outside, for burning stones were falling from the sky like hail." From those words, future generations can only begin to imagine the terror that swept over Pompeii, the moment when nature unleashed its fury, and the city vanished from the face of the earth. As excavations continued, researchers discovered that Pompeii had been an extraordinarily prosperous and advanced city. The stone-paved streets still bore the deep ruts of chariot wheels. The walls were covered with vivid frescoes, marble statues, and intricate mosaics. Archaeological findings revealed that Pompeii had more than 100 taverns, despite a population of only 20,000 people. The city also had 3 enormous public bath complexes divided into male and female sections. Each contained pools of warm, hot, and cold water and could accommodate up to 1,000 bathers at once. Inside the baths were changing rooms, massage chambers, and latrines. Beneath the floors, steam circulated through ceramic pipes, creating a heating system so sophisticated that it would take another 1,000 years before Europe outside the Roman Empire achieved anything comparable. Fresh water was carried from the mountains 10 kilometers away through elaborately made ceramic aqueducts. Water towers were built above the public baths, channeling large pipes into smaller ones that distributed water throughout the city. The people of Pompeii even used flushing toilets, and all waste flowed through long underground sewers. The city's prosperity astonished modern scholars so advanced that even many present-day cities could hardly rival it. Yet prosperity did not mean virtue. Pompeii was a capital of pleasure and vice, a place of indulgence and excess. What seemed like paradise was in truth a hell awaiting judgment. "Enjoy life, for tomorrow is uncertain," they said. This phrase was even engraved on their silver drinking cups. The citizens of Pompeii lived for pleasure alone, seeking more luxury, more decadence, more indulgence, heedless of consequence. The more the Pompeians wrapped themselves in the cloak of modernity and prosperity, the further they drifted from morality, committing acts that violated conscience and defied the laws of heaven. Slaves suffered unimaginable cruelty, and that was the crime of Pompeii. Pompeii's wealth came from trade with foreign lands. But they did not merely trade goods. Slaves were their most profitable commodity. Slaves had no rights, not even recognition as human beings. They labored under brutal conditions, were forced to fight for amusement in the arena, and were torn apart by beasts to the cheers of tens of thousands. Yet the most perverse degradation of Pompeii was its unrestrained sexual corruption. Across the city and workshops, shops, and inns' walls were covered with obscene frescoes depicting orgies, group sex, and homosexuality without restraint or shame. Historian Mary Beard of Cambridge University wrote in her book, Pompeii, The Life of a Roman Town. On doorways, bakeries, and along the streets, one could easily see images of sexual organs, symbols of power, status, and fortune. In brothels, inns, and villas, erotic frescoes and sculptures filled every wall. Even public parks displayed statues of sexual acts. Pompeii, with only 20,000 inhabitants, had 25 brothels, the entire society steeped in lust and debauchery. In 1819, King Francis I of Naples, upon visiting Pompeii with his wife, was so ashamed by the explicit frescoes that he ordered the exhibits closed. They remained sealed until the year 2000. A fact deeply tragic, for it revealed that modern society had fallen even further into depravity than Pompeii itself. But the sins did not stop there. The people of Pompeii were also consumed by gluttony to the point of madness. Their menus included crane tongues, livers of songbirds, imported sea urchins from Spain, giraffes from North Africa, and flamingos from the Mediterranean. There was nothing they would not eat. Some even believed that eels fed with human flesh had a superior flavor, and they fed freshly killed slaves to their eels. In those times, eating while reclining was a symbol of high status. The wealthy dined lying sideways on marble couches, with cushions propping themselves up on one elbow. Children and those of lower rank sat while slaves and servants stood beside them to serve. Their banquets began at 4 in the afternoon and lasted until midnight, filled with drunkenness, music, and debauchery. The rich feasted daily, indulging in music by day and orgies by night. To flaunt their wealth, nobles would take a few bites of fine meat, then throw it to the floor. They would eat a handful of grapes and toss the rest aside. Vulgarity and waste were the new symbols of refinement. They also found pleasure in blood and violence. Pompeii's grand amphitheater could seat over 10,000 people, built 50 years before Rome's Colosseum. But these were not sporting events. They were real battles to the death, between beasts, between slaves and wild animals, between prisoners and prisoners. The wealthy and commoners alike were frenzied with excitement at these brutal spectacles. The roar of beasts, the screams of men, the blood spraying across the arena, the more savage and gory the scene, the louder the cheers became. What thrilled the citizens of Pompeii was not compassion, but madness. It was not sport. It was murder made into entertainment. Later, Christian scholars concluded that Pompeii embodied the 7 deadly sins: violence, lust, greed, gluttony, pride, and unrestrained indulgence, which led to divine punishment. They believed it was the fire of Pompeii's own lust that awakened Mount Vesuvius after 800 years of slumber. And then what was meant to come came. On August 24th, 79 AD, the greatest natural disaster of the ancient world descended upon Pompeii. In just 24 hours, more than 5,000 citizens vanished from the earth as Mount Vesuvius erupted in fury. The volcano, which had slept for 8 centuries, only 10 kilometers from the city, suddenly awakened, spewing fire and ash in a cataclysm of destruction. It was not coincidence. It was retribution, a warning from heaven to awaken mankind. Billowing clouds of smoke rose skyward, and torrents of molten rock erupted with thunderous explosions. The sky darkened, the earth quaked, and lava cascaded down the slopes, flooding the streets and turning everything to stone. Massive boulders and volcanic ash sealed every doorway, suffocating those trapped inside. In just 18 hours, Vesuvius expelled more than 10 billion tons of rock and ash. The once glorious city of Pompeii was buried beneath tens of meters of volcanic debris. The splendid streets, the lavish villas, the brutal arenas, the wasteful and arrogant people all vanished in an instant. The people of Pompeii could never have imagined that the uncertain tomorrow they joked about would come so soon. Along with their lives, an entire civilization and its mighty walls fell into ruin. And on one wall, a citizen had scrawled his final words. "This is a city of sin deserving of death." Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the disaster from Misenum across the Bay of Naples, wrote, "Ash was still falling hotter and thicker by the moment, and later. Then came the torrent of volcanic rocks blackened and cracked by fire. Thousands fled in panic, but those who stayed behind had no chance of survival. The deadly rain of volcanic debris crushed roofs and buried everyone beneath. Shortly after midnight, Vesuvius erupted once more, hurling torrents of ash and gas at speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Pompeii and Herculaneum were completely swallowed by the ash. For centuries, the locations of these buried Roman cities were lost, thought to be mere legends. Historian John Bodell of Brown University said they had become cities of myth. When a section of Herculaneum was accidentally uncovered in 1709, scholars realized they might finally find these almost mythical places. But for more than a century afterward, excavations remained sporadic. It was not until 1863 that Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli began the first systematic excavation of Pompeii. What he found shook the world. Buried beneath 30 feet of volcanic debris, much of Pompeii remained astonishingly intact. "Vesuvius froze the city in an instant, like insects trapped in amber," said Bodell. Bakers' loaves were still in their ovens, and eggs still unbroken in their shells. Pompeii remains one of the most important archaeological sites of the Roman world. Houses, shops, temples, and thousands of frescoes painted on plaster walls provide the most detailed image of ancient Roman life ever discovered. Excavations also revealed the victims themselves, their bodies encased in hardened volcanic ash, frozen at the exact moment of death. When the flesh decayed, the voids left behind preserved the shapes of their final agony. To capture these forms, Fiorelli poured plaster into the cavities, like an artist casting a sculpture. There was the figure of a man curled tightly into a ball, another stretching upward to protect himself, a mother shielding her child. Their postures forever frozen are grim evidence of the tragic fate of Pompeii's people. The disaster of Pompeii was in truth a punishment for the boundless sins of mankind, a cleansing fire that swept away corruption. Those human and animal forms trapped in ash and stone show that by the time repentance comes, it is already too late. Yet modern humanity seems blind to this lesson. Today, the ruins of Pompeii are opened for commerce and tourism. The tragedy turned into spectacle, the sins of old glorified as art. Many even romanticize Pompeii's depravity as beauty. But heaven does not punish without reason. All disasters are born of human choice. God treasures human life more than we do ourselves. He does not wish for people to destroy themselves, so he leaves warnings and signs. But over time, human culture has deteriorated, straying ever further from divine morality. Since the sexual revolution of the 1960s, humanity has sunk to the brink of moral collapse. Would God reopen such a page of history merely for people to admire, to turn it into inspiration for art? No. It is a message, a divine warning for the generations to come. If mankind cannot return to goodness, to truth, and to moral integrity, then just like Pompeii, the world will face its own day of judgment, a night of fire and ash. Decoding the sudden disappearance of the Maya civilization. Deep within the rainforests of Central America, where the song of birds mingles with the whispers of tropical rain, there once existed a civilization so magnificent that it continues to astonish the world, the Maya civilization. More than 4,000 years ago, in the dense jungles of Central America, a great people rose from the earth and built one of the most dazzling civilizations in human history, the civilization of the Maya. From the 20th century BC to the 9th century AD, the Maya Empire stretched across the regions of Yucatan, modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. It was not a single unified empire, but rather a confederation of dozens of city-states, each its own kingdom, with an independent ruler, temples, and rituals. Yet they all shared one sacred bond, an unwavering faith in the gods, and a divine connection between humanity and the cosmos. At its peak, the Maya population reached over 10 million, living in hundreds of cities, meticulously planned to a degree that still astonishes modern archaeologists. Vast stone roads connected the ceremonial centers. Systems of canals, reservoirs, and terraces displayed an engineering brilliance far ahead of their time. Even without the use of the wheel metal tools or beasts of burden, the Maya built towering pyramids that rose dozens of meters into the air, perfectly aligned with the movements of the stars. The great cities of Tikal-Palenque-Copan and Calakmul were once radiant centers of human power and knowledge. In Tikal, the largest pyramid, the Temple of the Great Jaguar, rose more than 70 meters high, constructed from millions of limestone blocks, so precisely fitted that not even a knife blade could pass between them. In Palenque, the intricate bas-reliefs depicted gods soaring across the heavens, while Copan was known as the Athens of the Americas, where philosophy, mathematics, and art reached their zenith. The Maya believed that every element of the universe possessed a soul. The earth, the sky, the moon, the sun, even the wind were all living beings. Thus, they did not merely observe nature. They communed with it. Mayan priests stayed awake through the night, charting the movements of the stars, recording every shift of Venus, calculating the cycles of the sun and moon with an accuracy that deviated only by a few seconds from modern science. They understood that time was not a straight line, but an endless circle. Every 125 years, the world would end and be reborn, an eternal rhythm of light and darkness, creation and destruction. For them, the Maya calendar was not just a system for counting days, but a map of the cosmos describing the harmony between the divine and the mortal. To live rightly, one must live in balance with heaven itself. The Maya regarded mathematics and astronomy as the language of the gods. They were among the first in the ancient world to conceive of the number zero, paving the way for complex calculation. Their stone calendars recorded the precise dates of solar and lunar eclipses, and even the orbital cycles of Venus millennia before the invention of the telescope. Their architectural masterpieces were stone-built time machines. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan, also known as the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, was constructed with 91 steps on each of its 4 sides. Including the top platform, the total was 365, symbolizing the days of the solar year. On the days of the spring and autumn, equinox sunlight slanted down the pyramid to create the illusion of a serpent made of light slithering from the temple's peak to the earth below. It was the manifestation of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the god of wisdom, art, and rebirth. Each year when the serpent of light appeared, thousands gathered at the base of the pyramid to sing hymns, offer sacrifices, and give thanks for living in a world still in harmony, a world where the gods still walked among men. The Maya envisioned the universe as a sacred tree, connecting the 3 realms of existence: the heavens above where the gods dwell, the earth where humans live, and the underworld Xibalba, where souls pass through for rebirth. All were intertwined in a cycle without end. Death was not an ending, but a doorway to return. That is why within Mayan tombs, archaeologists have found not only jewels and ornaments, but also food and drink offerings to accompany the departed on their journey to the celestial realm. At its height, the Maya civilization represented a perfect harmony between science, art, and faith. Every temple they built was both a sanctuary of worship and an observatory of the heavens. Every ritual they performed was a reflection of their devotion to maintaining the order between heaven and earth. The Maya civilization, at the summit of its glory, stood as a beacon of wisdom and sanctity, a world where humanity lived in harmony with nature and never forgot to give thanks to the gods. Modern people often assume that the Maya civilization is connected to the people of modern-day Mexico. In truth, It is not. The modern Mexicans are a mixed race, the descendants of intermarriage between the Spanish colonists and native tribes of the Americas. The Maya culture, however, belongs to an earlier cycle of civilization, what ancient texts and spiritual traditions call a prehistoric civilization. That ancient humanity was destroyed long ago in what is now Mexico, and only a small number of survivors escaped. In fact, the ancient Maya civilization was directly related to the Mongolian race. Why do we say that the Maya have a connection to the Mongols? Throughout this current cycle of civilization, we have witnessed many great exoduses of people escaping persecution. The Jewish people, for instance, fled Egypt under the guidance of Moses, eventually settling in the Middle East. Many Puritans fled religious oppression in Europe to seek refuge in North America. And in the long history of the Asian continent, there were also momentous migrations that shook the earth. In the distant ages of antiquity, when the American continent first took shape, there already existed traces of civilizations that came from other worlds. The land that would become the Americas had witnessed many cycles of rise and destruction, each one replacing the last. Even modern records, such as Wikipedia, still preserve remnants of this ancient mystery. During the most recent Ice Age, sea levels were low enough to allow humans and animals to migrate from Asia to North America by walking across what is now known as the Bering Land Bridge, located north of the Bering Sea. It is generally believed to have been the first route by which humans entered the Americas. That is what modern science has been able to deduce. But if we follow the same science, then the Ice Age was supposedly a time when no human beings yet existed. And even if we accept that there were humans, then how could they have survived such an extreme environment? Would they not have required a very advanced level of civilization to endure those frozen conditions? If they possess such advancement, then why would they still need to hunt animals like primitive tribes? It would be like imagining modern city dwellers abandoning technology to chase prey in the wilderness. Although the hunting migration theory remains full of holes, one question persists. Why did such an advanced people undertake a massive migration to the Americas, create a glorious civilization, and leave behind so many mysteries for future generations to decipher? To this day, these questions remain unanswered. Yet, according to the testimony of those with spiritual vision practitioners who possess the ability to perceive past lives, the situation in that era was as follows. The term Ice Age, they say, does not mean an era of lifeless cold, buried in endless snow and silence, as we often imagine. In reality, during that time, the heart of Asia, particularly the region of northern Central Asia, was home to an extremely advanced human civilization. According to divine design, each region of the earth had its own people created by the gods to suit its mountains, rivers, and elements. And in the central region of Asia, the dominant race was what we now call the Mongoloid people. At that time, their civilization had reached an extraordinarily high level of development. They could travel between planets within the solar system, move objects through the power of thought, and possessed an astronomy so sophisticated that their calendars were nearly perfect. But the gods saw that this civilization had reached the end of its appointed cycle. Because these people already had advanced knowledge and technology, the gods revealed omens to those among them who still held virtue, warning them to lead the righteous away from the doomed land and migrate across the seas to settle in a warmer region where life could begin anew. Then, in a single instant, under divine decree, that magnificent land, splendid beyond imagination, vanished completely without a trace. The virtuous leaders of that race gathered about 200,000 people, their families, friends, subordinates, and companions, and obeyed the will of heaven. They left behind the homeland their ancestors had built over tens of thousands of years. Their hearts were heavy with sorrow, yet instinct told them that the land they once knew had become a wasteland. If they wished to survive, they had to go. And so began one of the greatest migrations in human prehistory, a long and perilous journey toward a new world. In that moment, gold and power lost all meaning. None of it could buy survival, only mutual compassion and unity could sustain their people. The northern lands of Asia then were dense with forests filled with giant beasts, creatures as large as dinosaurs, and in those untamed regions lived primitive tribes that were savage and hostile. The migrants pressed onward along the coast, heading north, enduring unimaginable trials. At times, enormous predators devoured their people. At other times, wild human tribes attacked and ate them. They struggled against unfamiliar climates and unpredictable disasters, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. When only about 10,000 remained one stormy night, a horde of monstrous creatures descended from the forests. Seeing that his people were too exhausted to resist, one leader rose with a torch in hand, running before the beasts to draw them away. More than 10 brave young men followed him, each holding a flame, luring dozens of the monsters into the darkness. One by one they fell torn apart, sacrificed to save their kin. The remaining chiefs urged their people to continue the march, weeping, as they went through rain and wind toward the unknown. Eventually, near the shore of what is now the Bering Sea, they encountered a tribe of wild men. By then, only about 2,000 survivors were left. The wild tribe captured several dozen of them, preparing to eat them alive. At that desperate moment, a beautiful and courageous young woman stepped forward from among the refugees. She said to her chieftain, "Last night I dreamed that I must use my smile to save our people." Without fear, she approached the savage tribe and smiled a pure, radiant smile filled with kindness. Her innocence disarmed the wild men. They were captivated by her gentle light. Moved and bewildered, they released the captives. That young woman became a heroine of her people, the one who turned the tide of fate. At that time, the Bering Sea had waves that rose high, and waters that were deep it was impossible to cross. Seeing that their tribe was blocked by the sea, the leaders discussed among themselves and agreed, "Only the gods can help us overcome this tribulation." So the entire tribe began to sit in meditation, using their most devout and sincere hearts to pray to heaven, asking that they might be allowed to cross the sea safely. Then suddenly a fierce wind arose, lasting 3 days and 3 nights, but they remained unmoved. After that came heavy rain for another 3 days and 3 nights, and some began to doubt the gods. Then came thunder and lightning. Some people were struck by lightning and died. Seeing this, others became shaken in their faith. Afterward, hailstones fell, and some were killed by the hail. After 7 days and 7 nights of darkness, when no sunlight could be seen, at last the bright sun appeared again. Someone went to look at the shore of the Bering Sea and exclaimed, "The great dike has broken, the waters have receded, and the rocks are showing." Some people tested the water. Even at its deepest, it only reached their chests. It could be crossed. And so the remaining survivors, now about 800 people, supported one another and walked across the Bering Strait, overcoming the greatest trial of their lives. Although they had crossed the Bering Strait and reached the American continent, the civilization there at that time, aside from a few ancient remains, was still a vast wilderness. Ferocious animals appeared often. The land and water were unfamiliar, and there was a lack of food. All of these were grave worries in the hearts of that prehistoric tribe. Having endured so many tribulations, they now understood deeply that in order to continue surviving, there were 2 essential things. First, they must have absolute faith in the divine. And second, they must preserve their kind and pure nature. This was of utmost importance. From that time on, they became kind-hearted and harmonious. Wherever they went, whatever they did, their first thought was always about the gods, how to respect and revere heaven. Among one another, they lived in increasing harmony. When they truly achieved this, they found that their wisdom grew far greater than before. One generation grew old, and the next inherited their resolve, continuing to build, to enrich their homeland, and to develop their civilization. As their people multiplied generation after generation, their descendants spread throughout the Americas. In Central America, where they felt closest to heaven, they gathered in greater numbers. There they founded the Maya civilization, which would later astonish mankind with its brilliance. Because their level of civilization was so advanced, and their morality so pure at the height of their glory, the gods permitted them to create the solar calendar and to leave behind a prophecy foretelling the present age of Earth, an era of purification and renewal. When the wicked would be eliminated, the righteous would remain, and a new golden age would begin. They even calculated the exact time and date of this transformation. This was also meant for modern people who have become overly attached to modern science and the theory of evolution, so that when standing before the evidence of such a highly developed ancient civilization, they would be forced to reflect and reconsider their own theories and actions. Later, the Maya of that era fulfilled their historical mission, and afterward, the gods removed them through various means, leaving behind only a small remnant. By the year 1526, a Spanish expedition arrived at a Maya tribe. Yet by then, the Maya were no longer the prehistoric Maya, but the descendants who remained after the divine cleansing. Their level of technology, culture, and morality could no longer compare with that of their ancestors. The Maya people at that time were hospitable. They sent a translator to meet the Spaniards, but the explorers, frightened by the mysterious culture of the Maya, burned all of their scriptures and records. From that time on, the Maya lost their divine aura in the eyes of history. In truth, their mission had been to bridge the previous civilization with the present one. Once that mission was complete, they too were meant to retreat into the depths of the earth or into the mountains, never to be found by modern people again. Today, when we think of the astonishing accuracy of the Maya prophecies, we cannot help but marvel at their glorious achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and anatomy, nor ignore the epic migration that shaped their destiny, a journey marked by the dust and trials of countless ages. Looking at the world today, human morality has completely decayed, and the natural environment has been devastated beyond precedent. In history, every time such a state has appeared, it has been the moment when those of corrupt morality faced divine elimination. Therefore, if humanity wishes to continue existing and developing on this earth, we must have faith in the divine revere. The gods care for one another with compassion and not become cold, indifferent, or follow the tide of corruption and moral decay. Whether humankind can survive this coming tribulation depends on how people treat the divine, how they treat their fellow human beings, and how they treat nature and all living things. Everything depends on the attitude and choices of each individual. After great civilizations like the Maya vanished into the shadows of time, humanity thought history had closed the chapter on the downfall of proud nations. Yet far away, in the endless expanse of the South Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 kilometers from any mainland, another story was waiting to be told. Quieter, lonelier, but no less tragic. It is the story of Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island. The mystery of the origin and disappearance of Easter Island. Amid the vastness of the sea, this small island was once the heart of a radiant culture. Between 1200 and 1600 AD, thousands of people lived on this land, barely 24 kilometers long, in harmony with nature. They cultivated the fertile volcanic soil, fished near the coast, and believed their ancestors were divine beings who ruled the winds, the rains, and the seasons. Across Rapa Nui, they raised colossal stone figures called moai. Some stood over 10 meters tall and weighed as much as 80 tons, carved from volcanic rock and placed facing the ocean. Their faces gazed toward the horizon, as if searching for something far beyond human sight, waiting for an answer from the heavens. The people of Rapa Nui believed that the spirits of their ancestors dwelled within these stones. When the wind swept across the cliffs and the waves broke upon the shore, they heard it as the whisper of the gods. To them, erecting a moai was not merely labor. It was a sacred act, a prayer for abundant harvests, calm seas, and the protection of their descendants. But in time, that faith turned into pride. Each tribe on the island competed to build larger, taller, and more intricate statues to display its power. They felled every palm tree on the island, using the trunks as rollers to move the massive stones from the volcanic quarry of Rano Raraku to the coastline. Gradually, the forests disappeared. Without trees, the soil eroded, the fresh water ran dry. The birds vanished, and the crops failed year after year. As food grew scarce, the tribes who once sang together became rivals. They fought over water, over land, over the ghosts of their ancestors. In their madness, the very Moai statues, the sacred symbols of their lineage, were toppled and beheaded by their own descendants. The people believed that when the statues fell, the spirits of their ancestors abandoned them. Faith crumbled, and with it vanished morality, compassion, and reverence for the divine. Archaeological evidence reveals signs of violent civil wars, destruction, and even cannibalism. The same hands that once carved the giants of stone in devotion now struggled merely to survive. When European explorers arrived on Rapa Nui in 1722, they did not discover a thriving culture, but a ruin. The forests were gone, leaving only barren rock and dust. The animals had disappeared, replaced by weeds and silence. From tens of thousands, the population had dwindled to a few hundred frail, frightened souls. And all around them stood hundreds of Moai statues, silent, broken witnesses of a people who had lost their faith in the Creator. Today, scientists describe the fall of Rapa Nui as a textbook case of ecological collapse, a society destroyed by its own overexploitation of natural resources. They speak of deforestation, erosion, and the collapse of a closed ecosystem. But beyond data and models lies a truth science cannot measure. The people of Rapa Nui did not just lose their forests, they lost their souls. When humans believe they can replace God, when they trust in the strength of their own hands and not in the humility of their hearts, the tragedy has already begun. They take what was meant as a gift, not knowing it was meant to preserve life. They cut down the trees that shielded their home, breaking the bond between themselves, nature, and the one who made both sea and sky. And so by an eternal law, when humankind exhausts the gifts given by heaven, the world around them grows barren, and so does their spirit. Today, if you stand before a Moai on Easter Island, with only the wind and waves as company, you may feel something heavier than stone. The statue's gaze does not look toward man, but through him toward the generations yet to come, whispering a timeless warning. Everything you have is a blessing. Forget that, and the ocean will one day swallow the ground beneath your feet. As the story of Rapa Nui fades beneath the sound of waves and the whisper of sea winds, humanity might think it lost only an island. Yet in truth, it was a prophecy carved in stone, a message for all generations to come. When mankind drains every blessing given by God, it is not the earth that perishes first, it is man himself who becomes forsaken by heaven and earth. From the dawn of creation, the Lord entrusted the earth and all living things to humankind with one sacred command, to govern it with responsibility and reverence. But through the ages, as human knowledge expanded alongside ambition, we forgot that we are not the masters of the universe, only the stewards chosen to preserve it. Every civilization that once rose to greatness, Babylon, Rome, Pompeii, Helike, and Rapa Nui, followed the same path: prosperity, then self-destruction. They cut down forests until the land was bare. They drained rivers until they turned to dust. They mined gold, silver, and precious stones as if wealth were the purpose of existence, and called it progress. Yet the richer humanity became in possessions, the poorer it grew in spirit. Today the world once again stands before the mirror of Rapa Nui. The seas are rising, forests are burning, the air is thick with poison, and still mankind digs deeper into the earth, cuts wider into the oceans, destroying what little remains of nature. The Amazon is aflame, rivers have turned black, and the night skies in many cities no longer hold stars. Man believes he is conquering nature, but in truth he is destroying the very cradle that gave him life. In the book of Genesis, the Lord said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." It was a gift, not a possession. But mankind has turned that gift into a mine, into a market, into a weapon of domination. the Moai statues of Rapa Nui, the fallen temples of Babylon, the charred walls of Pompeii all tell the same story. No civilization is destroyed by accident. Every collapse is the result of forgetting divine grace and crossing the boundaries heaven once set. If Earth was the Creator's gift, then today humanity must face a final question. Are we still worthy of it? For when mankind reaches the limit of its greed, God will not need to strike in anger. Earth, water, wind, and fire, the four elements that once granted life, will simply complete their natural cycle and reclaim everything mankind ever called great. And so the Moai still stand stoic against wind and wave as silent sentinels of an ancient warning. When humanity ceases to give thanks to heaven, even the earth itself will withdraw its mercy. After Rapa Nui vanished beneath the roar of the sea and the warning voice of heaven, humanity believed that history had closed its long, tragic chapter on the fall of great civilizations. Yet if one looks deeper into the layers of the earth and the whispers of ancient myths, a different truth emerges long before Atlantis. Long before any civilization recorded by humankind, there existed another land, a world more radiant, more sacred, and so ancient that the modern mind can scarcely comprehend it. They called it Lemuria, also known as Mu, a legendary continent said to have sunk beneath the depths of the Indian Ocean in prehistoric times. Lemuria, the legendary continent lost beneath the Indian Ocean. Before Atlantis rose and perished in its splendor, ancient legends spoke of a land even older and farther away, Lemuria, or Mu. It was believed to be the cradle of the first civilizations, a paradise filled with divine light and wisdom, now slumbering beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean. No one knows exactly where Lemuria once lay. Some mystics claim it stretched from the eastern coast of Africa all the way to modern-day Indonesia. Others believe it linked Madagascar and India, forming a vast land bridge that once united distant continents before the sea swallowed it whole. Ancient scriptures from India and Tibet describe Lemuria as the birthplace of the first humans, divine beings with translucent bodies, extraordinary intellect, and the ability to commune directly with celestial realms. According to mystical traditions, the Lemurians did not live for war or material gain. They sought harmony with the cosmos itself, using spiritual energy and crystalline power to communicate, build, and heal. Their cities, it is said, shimmered with inner light. They needed no sun, for every creature radiated its own brilliance. But as time passed, like all civilizations before and after, the Lemurians slowly drifted away from the divine. They began to use their sacred powers not to serve, but to control. Ambition corrupted the balance of energy, and the earth beneath them began to crack. Volcanoes erupted, tsunamis rose, and the ground quaked day after day. According to legend, the Lemurian priests foresaw their doom. They carved final warnings upon massive stones, hid sacred crystals and records deep within the earth, hoping that one day future generations of humankind might uncover them. Then one night, the heavens ignited. Lightning tore through the sky. The vast continent of Lemuria slowly sank beneath the sea, taking with it millions of souls, crystal palaces, and secrets that would vanish forever into darkness. Today, many scientists dismiss Lemuria as mere myth, an ancient attempt to explain continental drift. Yet strangely, from Madagascar to India, archaeologists continue to find puzzling traces, eroded stone statues beneath the sea-submerged architectural patterns in the Indian Ocean, and genetic links between the peoples of India and Madagascar, too ancient to be coincidence. Could Lemuria have truly existed as the first chapter of human history, a sacred civilization erased to make way for the age of mortal man? And if Atlantis stands as a lesson in pride, then Lemuria is a reminder of something even deeper, the loss of divine nature within humanity. For when man no longer looks to heaven for light, but only to the earth for gold, the sea will open its mouth once more, and history will repeat its eternal cycle. The Indus civilization, the mystery of the cities abandoned in the desert. After Lemuria and Atlantis vanished beneath the seas, the tide of time turned once more, carrying humanity into a new age. An era when cities began to rise from the dust, shaped by human hands and guided by divine inspiration. In the fertile plains between two legendary rivers, the Indus and the Gaggar-Hakra, a remarkable civilization was born. The Indus Valley civilization known today through its two greatest cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, from around 3300 to 1300 BC. While the Egyptians were still building their first pyramids, the Indus people had already founded a flourishing urban world in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Unlike other empires built on conquest and hierarchy, the Indus civilization left behind no grand palaces, no colossal statues of gods, no royal tombs. Instead, they built cities of logic and compassion, clean organized and astonishingly advanced. From above, Mohenjo-Daro looked like a vast chessboard. Straight streets intersected at perfect right angles, dividing the city into precise zones for homes, markets, and administrative quarters. Each house had its own well bathroom and toilet connected to a drainage system, something the rest of the world would not achieve for more than 3,000 years. Underground brick-lined sewers ran beneath the streets, connecting every home to a central network that carried waste away from the city. What stunned archaeologists was the remarkable uniformity from Harappa to Mohenjo-Daro. The size of the bricks, the layout of the homes, and even the proportions of the buildings followed the same mathematical standard. This revealed not only technical mastery, but also a highly centralized authority, one capable of uniting vast populations under shared civic order and design. Yet the greater the achievement, the deeper the mystery, for everything they built now lies in silence. Thousands of artifacts, tools, statues, pottery, and stone seals remain, but the voices of the people themselves are lost. The Indus script, carved onto hundreds of seals, still defies decipherment. No one knows what language they spoke, where they came from, or most hauntingly, why they vanished. Conventional theories suggest catastrophic flooding may have destroyed the cities. Layers of thick silt and mud indicate massive floods along the Indus River, sweeping away homes and crops. Others propose disease or contaminated water supplies, forcing survivors to abandon their once great cities. But a darker theory lingers, one whispered among historians and mystics alike, that the Indus civilization may have fallen to a weapon of unimaginable power. When archaeologists first excavated Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, they uncovered hundreds of skeletons scattered across the streets, many still holding hands, as if death had struck in a single instant. There were no signs of war, no burnt temples, no destroyed fortresses. Yet the bricks and stones bore traces of exposure to intense heat, equivalent to that of a nuclear explosion. Ancient Hindu texts, such as the Mahabharata and Ramayana, describe weapons wielded by the gods that mirror such destruction. A single projectile charged with all the power in the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame, brighter than 1,000 suns. Men's bodies were burned beyond recognition. Hair and nails fell away. Waters boiled, and all living creatures perished. Was it metaphor or the distant memory of a cataclysm too terrifying to name? Whatever the cause, one fact remains: Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were abandoned suddenly without warning. Everyday objects lay untouched, doors stood open, meals uneaten as if the people had stepped outside and never returned. Today, archaeologists call Mohenjo-Daro the Pompeii of the East. Like Pompeii, it was frozen in time, a city of perfection entombed by catastrophe. A place where human brilliance reached its zenith, only to crumble into silence. Perhaps like every fallen civilization, the people of the Indus Valley grew too enamored of their prosperity and forgot the sacred balance that sustains all things. For when human intellect seeks to surpass the divine, when knowledge is used not to honor heaven, but to defy it, even the most advanced city becomes nothing more than a tower built upon sand. And so, amid the scorched walls and motionless figures of Mohenjo-Daro, the message remains unchanged, whispered across millennia. When a civilization reaches its greatest height, yet loses its moral soul, destruction is not a question of if, but when. The ancient Khmer civilization. Angkor, the city, devoured by the jungle. After the Indus civilization faded away along its desiccated rivers, humanity seemed to have learned the lesson of balance between man and nature. Yet only a few millennia later, in the blazing lands of Southeast Asia, another empire rose, magnificent, powerful, and destined to fall into silence like all who came before. This was the ancient Khmer civilization, whose beating heart was Angkor, the legendary city now hidden deep within the Cambodian jungle, from the 9th to the 15th century AD. The Khmer Empire stood as one of the most advanced and powerful civilizations in all of Asia. Under the reign of King Jayavarman II, the empire was unified and expanded its borders across modern-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and southern Vietnam. For more than 6 centuries, the Khmer people built a radiant world, a realm where religion, art, and engineering merged into a civilization far ahead of its time. At its center stood Angkor, the city of the gods, sprawling across more than 1,000 square kilometers, filled with temples, canals, and vast artificial reservoirs. Its crown jewel was Angkor Wat, the greatest temple complex ever constructed by human hands, built to honor the Hindu god Vishnu. Composed of over 5 million sandstone blocks, each weighing several tons. Angkor Wat was not merely an act of devotion, but a triumph of geometry, astronomy, and divine architecture. From above, its design reflects perfect harmony between heaven and earth. The 5 central towers symbolize Mount Meru, the cosmic axis in Hindu mythology, while the surrounding moat represents the eternal ocean. Every corridor, every pathway aligns precisely with the rising and setting of the sun, on the equinoxes, proving the Khmer possessed remarkable astronomical knowledge. But Angkor was more than a spiritual monument. It was a city built upon water. With hundreds of reservoirs, barrage canals, and hydraulic systems, the Khmer turned an arid plain into a fertile paradise. Water was the lifeblood of Angkor, bringing prosperity, sustaining crops, and supporting millions of lives. Yet the very element that gave Angkor its glory would one day become its undoing. As the empire reached its zenith, pride began to cloud its wisdom. Successive kings, seeking to outshine their predecessors, built ever larger temples and reservoirs, straining the environment and upsetting the natural water balance. Forests were stripped bare for timber and stone, the soil eroded, the rivers silted up. Then came years of drought, followed by torrential floods that destroyed the intricate hydraulic network, the very heart of the empire. Meanwhile, a spiritual shift began shaking the foundations of Khmer power. The conversion from Hinduism to Buddhism altered not only faith, but governance itself. When Buddhist kings ascended the throne, they abandoned the worship of Vishnu, fracturing the unifying ideology that had bound the Khmer together for centuries. Temples were deserted monuments left unfinished, and the once cohesive belief system crumbled into silence. Then came wars, famine, and disease. Those who had once ruled over half of Southeast Asia now fled their sacred city, disappearing into the forests that once sustained them. And as with every fallen civilization, when humanity turns away from heaven, heaven reclaims what was once given. Angkor, the jewel of the East, was slowly swallowed by the jungle. Massive tree roots gripped temple walls like serpents. Ancient trunks pierced through stone roofs. Statues of gods lay buried under moss, their faces fading into eternity. When French explorers rediscovered Angkor in the 19th century, they were stunned by the sight, a colossal stone metropolis, consumed by nature, yet miraculously intact, a true Pompeii of Asia. Today, Angkor Wat stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a symbol of Cambodia, and a timeless testament to an unchanging truth: no civilization, however mighty, can endure if it loses the balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. The Khmer built a world of divine brilliance, but it was pride, not war, that brought their downfall. And now, deep within the forest, the stone faces of Angkor remain silent, gazing down through the vines, as if whispering to all generations that follow. When mankind forgets to revere heaven, even the forest, once the cradle of life, will become the shroud of the civilization it nurtured. The Minoan civilization, Crete and the wrath of the sea. After Angkor was swallowed by the jungle's silence, the tales of vanished civilizations seem to have ended in the east. Yet in the western Mediterranean, among the sunlit islands of Greece, history recorded another tragedy. The rise and fall of a people so brilliant that the ancient Greeks believed they were descendants of the gods. This was the Minoan civilization, Europe's first great culture, which ruled the Aegean Sea for more than half a millennium. From around 2000 to 1450 BC, the island of Crete was the beating heart of the Mediterranean. From its harbors, Minoan ships sailed far and wide, trading with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Under their legendary ruler, King Minos, Crete became not just a center of commerce, but a cradle of art, science, and spirituality. Their capital, Knossos, was a wonder of the ancient world. A vast stone labyrinth with over 1,000 rooms, walls covered in brilliant frescoes, advanced plumbing systems, flushing toilets, and skylit halls. Centuries before Athens rose to power, the Minoans lived in multi-story homes decorated with vivid depictions of sea life, octopuses, fish, corals, a reflection of their reverence for the ocean, the very force that sustained them. The Minoans worshipped the mother goddess, the embodiment of fertility and harmony with nature. Their sacred bull-leaping rituals symbolized courage and balance between man and the natural world. On the palace walls of Knossos, frescoes still show elegant women with flowing hair and radiant eyes, icons of vitality, artistry, and freedom unmatched in the ancient world. Everything they had, wealth, faith, and beauty, revolved around the sea. But it was the sea itself that would bring their downfall. Around 1450 BC, on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, a volcano erupted with unimaginable force, one of the most powerful eruptions in Earth's history. The entire center of the island collapsed into the sea, sending ash tens of kilometers into the sky. The explosion unleashed tsunamis towering over 30 meters, which raced toward Crete, smashing ports and coastal cities. Ash and toxic gases darkened the skies for months, poisoning crops and suffocating the island. The once fertile land became barren, and the great maritime economy that had sustained Minoan prosperity was destroyed overnight. Survivors described the sky glowing red like blood, the ocean roaring like a beast. They believed that Poseidon, god of the sea, had unleashed his fury upon mankind. And indeed, within a single night, everything that symbolized Minoan greatness, palaces, temples, statues, sank into silence beneath the waves. The Minoans never recovered. Weakened by disaster, they fell under invasion from the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece, who conquered Crete and brought an end to what had once been a maritime paradise. Many scholars now believe that the Minoan collapse inspired Plato's story of Atlantis, a magnificent island that defied the gods and was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. The ruins buried beneath the ash of Santorini, with their preserved walls and shattered homes, bear a haunting resemblance to Plato's description. Perhaps the Minoans were the real Atlantis, a people who reached extraordinary heights of art, beauty, and knowledge, only to remind humanity of an eternal truth. When man believes he can master nature, nature will return to humble him. Today, as the sun sets over Santorini and steam still rises faintly from its volcanic caldera, one might imagine that beneath those waters, the echoes of that ancient warning still whisper, "Every empire born of the sea will one day return to the sea." Petra, the forgotten city in the Jordanian desert. After magnificent civilizations like Minoan were swallowed by the sea, humanity thought nature's wrath had finally ceased. But when the oceans grew calm, the desert began to speak. In a land where life seemed impossible among sand, wind, and stone, a glorious city rose again. It was not built with bricks or wood, but carved directly into the cliffs as if the earth itself had shaped it. This was Petra, the legendary city of the Nabateans, the rose-red jewel hidden in the heart of Jordan's desert. Around 300 BCE, amid the harsh winds and endless dunes, a nomadic tribe called the Nabateans chose to settle. Skilled in the art of desert trade, they carried frankincense, salt, silk, and gold along the routes that connected Arabia, Egypt, Syria, and the Mediterranean. In a place where nothing should have thrived, they built Petra, an oasis of stone light and human ingenuity. To reach Petra, one must pass through the Sick, a narrow canyon, stretching over a kilometer, flanked by cliffs of crimson sandstone rising nearly 100 meters high. Sunlight filters through the rock crevices, guiding travelers toward a breathtaking site, Al-Khazne, known as the Treasury of the Pharaoh. This monumental temple, over 40 meters tall, is carved straight into the mountain face, its facade shimmering in the desert sun, adorned with Corinthian columns, angelic figures, and Hellenistic patterns, so precise that even today they leave the world in awe. But Petra was far more than a single temple. It was an entire city of stone. Hundreds of structures were hewn into the cliffs: homes, tombs, palaces, theaters, markets, and sanctuaries. The Nabateans also engineered one of the most advanced water systems of the ancient world. With ceramic pipes, rainwater cisterns, drainage canals, and underground reservoirs that sustained life and agriculture in one of the driest places on Earth. Thanks to their brilliance, Petra soon became the largest trading hub in the ancient Middle East. Caravans laden with spices and silk stopped here, transforming the city into a bridge between East and West. Gold pearls, gems, frankincense, and exotic goods poured in from every corner of the known world. At night, oil lamps lit up the sick, and the sound of laughter, songs, and wind chimes echoed across the red sandstone valley. Petra had become the beating heart of the ancient world. Yet prosperity never lasts forever. The richer they became, the more the Nabateans forgot humility. They drifted from their faith, drowned in wealth and ambition, forgetting that life in the desert was a gift, not a possession. When the Roman Empire expanded in the 1st century CE, Petra gradually lost its place as the center of trade. New maritime routes through the Red Sea and Egypt bypassed the desert city, and Petra began to fade from memory. Then in 363 CE, a massive earthquake struck. Structures once thought eternal collapsed like sand. The water system shattered, temples crumbled, and thousands perished beneath a red cloud of dust. The survivors fled, leaving behind only stone, wind, and silence, a silence that lasted for nearly 15 centuries. Petra was abandoned, buried beneath sand, forgotten so completely that many believed it was only a myth. It was not until 1812 that Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt rediscovered the entrance to the Sick, and sunlight once again touched the rose-colored walls of the city after 500 years of darkness. Today, as the sun sets, its golden light washes over Petra's sandstone cliffs, igniting them in fiery shades of red and gold. People call it the Rose City of the Desert, a jewel carved between sand and time, proud yet sorrowful. Petra stands as an eternal reminder of a sacred truth. No city, whether carved in stone or built of gold, can endure once humanity forgets gratitude toward the one who grants them life. The sandstone walls of Petra still stand not merely as ruins, but as stone-carved warnings for all time. When man believes he can survive in the desert without heaven, it will be the dust itself that consumes him. Lemuria, the prehistoric civilization lost beneath the Great Flood. After Petra sank into the sands of time, humanity believed the lessons of fallen civilizations had come to an end. But deep within the vast oceans, deeper than human memory and farther than any ancient map, there remains another legend, one that speaks of a world that vanished long before history began to be written. That world was called Lemuria, also known as Mu, a mythical continent said to have once existed in the Indian Ocean, where humankind lived in harmony with heaven, earth, and sea until it was swallowed by the Great Flood, leaving behind nothing but fragments of memory scattered across the myths of mankind. According to ancient records and esoteric traditions, Lemuria was not merely a land, but the cradle of the first humanity. The Lemurians were described as tall, luminous beings with pure hearts, capable of communicating through thought and understanding the language of the universe. They spoke not with words, but with light and energy. Their dwellings were not made of stone, but of crystals and minerals that glowed, absorbing the sun's radiance by day and shining softly through the night. The Lemurians believed that all things possessed a soul, from a drop of water to a gust of wind, from a bird's feather to a grain of sand. They saw themselves as the guardians of balance between heaven and the sea, living by the sacred principle. Harmony is life, conflict is extinction. There was no war, no currency, no desire for possession, only knowledge, meditation, and gratitude toward the Creator. But like every civilization, before and after when mankind began to understand too much, they also began to forget the most important thing: humility. Some Lemurian priests started to use the sacred energy of crystals, not for peace, but for control, manipulating weather, altering the elements, and opening gateways to other dimensions. This immense surge of power threw the Earth's balance into chaos. Volcanoes erupted, the ground quaked, and from the depths of the ocean, colossal waves began to rise. According to ancient Indian and Tibetan scriptures, the first great flood marked the end of Lemuria. The remaining priests, realizing their fate, carved their final warnings onto massive stone tablets and hid them deep within caves beneath the Himalayas and the Indian Ocean, hoping that one day, future generations would find them and awaken. Then one night the sky burst into flames. The sea rose higher than mountains, engulfing the entire continent. From afar, Lemuria glowed one last time, like a star fading into the deep. Millions of souls, cities of crystal, and temples of light vanished in a single moment. Today, many scientists dismiss Lemuria as mere legend, an ancient attempt to explain continental drift. Yet strangely, beneath the Indian Ocean, around Madagascar and India, archaeologists have found massive underwater structures. Stones worn smooth by the tides and traces of DNA shared between the people of Madagascar and South Asia, separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Could it be that Lemuria truly existed as the first chapter of human history, when man and the divine still walked side by side and could hear each other's voices through the sea breeze? If Atlantis was the lesson of pride, then Lemuria is the warning of forgetting the divine spark within ourselves. For when humanity ceases to look to heaven for light and only digs into the earth, for beyond the ocean will open its mouth once again, and history will repeat its eternal cycle. No great flood comes without reason, and no civilization vanishes without cause. When mankind loses reverence for the Creator, when intellect is placed above virtue, and power is worshipped as God, then the sea, once gentle and giving, will rise again in fury. Mohenjo-Daro, the silent city of the dead, where radiation still remains. After the legends of Lemuria and Atlantis sank beneath the waves, humanity believed that such cataclysms belonged only to myth. Yet in the heart of the Sindh desert, what is now Pakistan, another mystery was unearthed. This time it wasn't a tale from scripture, but something carved into stone, preserved in dust, and buried beneath the earth. A city that died in perfect stillness, as if an invisible hand had wiped it from existence in a single breath. That city was Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead. Over 400-500 years ago, during the height of the Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-Daro stood as one of the most advanced cities in the ancient world. Along with Harappa, it formed the beating heart of an empire that stretched for thousands of miles, an empire of art, trade, and astonishing engineering that would not be rivaled again for millennia. The city was meticulously planned, straight roads intersecting at perfect right angles, brick houses identical in size and structure, each with its own private bathroom, well and drainage system, something that even Greece and Rome would not achieve until centuries later. Beneath the surface lay an enormous network of underground sewers precisely designed to separate clean and wastewater, proving that its builders possessed knowledge far beyond their time. At the center of Mohenjo-Daro stood the Great Bath, a massive pool lined with waterproof bricks and bitumen, with staircases descending on both sides. It was likely used for ritual purification, surrounded by granaries, markets, and administrative buildings. Everything about the city reflected order, intellect, and a remarkable devotion to civic life. And then one day, it all stopped. No signs of war, no evidence of invasion, no mass graves, no plagues. The bustling streets fell silent. Houses remained standing, but their people were gone. When archaeologists began excavating in the 20th century, they were stunned to find human skeletons scattered across the streets, lying as if life had ended mid-step. Some were holding hands. Others had fallen face down in doorways, as though struck down without warning. There were no signs of panic or escape. The entire city appeared to have perished in an instant. But the most shocking discovery came later. Unusually high levels of radiation were detected in the soil, the bricks, even in the bones themselves. In some areas, radiation levels were measured to be dozens of times higher than normal, comparable to the ground zero of a nuclear explosion. Bricks were fused together into glassy slag, something that can only occur at temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Celsius. What could have unleashed such destructive heat 4 millennia before modern science discovered atomic power? There were no volcanoes, no meteor impacts, and no traces of conventional weaponry. A number of modern researchers began to speculate an astonishing possibility. Mohenjo-Daro may have been destroyed by an ancient nuclear blast. They pointed to passages from the Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic written over 3,000 years ago, which described a single projectile charged with all the power in the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame brighter than 10,000 suns. Bodies were burned to ashes, hair and nails fell off, pottery broke without cause. The resemblance to a nuclear detonation was uncanny. Mainstream historians reject this idea, suggesting instead that floods, earthquakes, or climate shifts led to the city's abandonment. Yet the truth remains elusive. Mohenjo-Daro's fall is one of the greatest enigmas in human history, a civilization of unmatched precision erased in silence. Many now call it the Pompeii of the East, a city that reached the peak of intellect and technology, only to vanish suddenly, leaving behind a haunting question. What really happened here? Had they achieved knowledge far beyond their moral capacity? Did the very wisdom that elevated them become the fire that consumed it? Today, Mohenjo-Daro still stands beneath the blazing desert sun. The charred bricks still radiate faint warmth, as if remembering that final flash. There are no voices, no footsteps, only the wind whispering through empty streets, telling of a people once so enlightened, yet who forgot that knowledge cannot save a heart that has turned away from God. The great flood of Noah, the final wrath, and the mercy of heaven. After the ancient civilizations, Lemuria, Atlantis, Mohenjo-Daro had vanished into the abyss of time. The earth kept turning, and humankind repeated the same mistakes. Ambition, lust, and arrogance swelled once again, until the heavens could no longer remain silent. And then one day, history witnessed the greatest deluge of all, the great flood of Noah, when waters rose to the mountaintops, and even the angels bowed their heads in silence. According to Genesis and the Book of Enoch, when mankind began to multiply upon the earth, the watchers the angels appointed to guard humanity saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they sinned against us in heaven. They abandoned their stations, descended to earth, took mortal women as wives, and bore a race of giants, known as the Nephilim, the heroes of old men of renown. Genesis 6:4. From that moment, both heaven and earth were defiled. The fallen angels taught men how to forge weapons to kill one another, how to smelt metal for vanity and lust, how to conjure charms and potions to enslave the soul. They brought knowledge to mankind, but it was knowledge twisted by pride. What humanity called civilization was in truth darkness dressed in light. The Book of Enoch records, "When men cried out to heaven, the Most High heard their voices. And he sent Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel to the earth to bind the fallen angels and cast them into the abyss of darkness, where they shall remain until the day of judgment." But the corruption they had sown had already taken root. Mankind turned against itself. Blood was spilled across the land, hearts grew cold, and morality crumbled. Scripture says, "The Lord saw how great man's wickedness had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time." The earth was filled with violence. What had once been born in light was now consumed by shadow, and the Almighty grieved that he had made man. Yet amid that sea of wickedness, one light still burned. A man righteous and pure whose faith in the Creator never wavered, even as the world drowned in sin. His name was Noah. Scripture declares Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah was the last man of pure lineage and steadfast faith. While angels and men alike turned from heaven, Noah still bowed his head in prayer. And in the stillness of the night, the voice of the Lord spoke within him, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and their wives." From that moment, Noah labored for decades building a massive vessel in the dry lands, while the world mocked him. They laughed and called him mad, insisting that no rain could ever drown the world. But Noah pressed on, knowing he was not building merely by command, but preparing for heaven's judgment. When all was ready, the Lord said, "Bring into the ark 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, to keep them alive with you." The beasts came forth in pairs. The birds soared above, and the door of the ark was shut by the hand of God himself. Then the skies darkened. Thunder roared like the cry of 1,000 spirits. Rain poured from the heavens, and fountains burst forth from the deep. For 40 days and 40 nights the deluge did not cease. Rivers became oceans, mountains disappeared, and the cries of mankind were swallowed by the waves. From above, the angels watched in silence. They had once pleaded for mercy, but sin had gone too far. The earth was drowned beneath the flood, and the sky was covered in unending darkness. Upon the endless sea, only Noah's ark drifted a speck of life afloat in the void. Inside, Noah and his family prayed ceaselessly. It is said that on the 39th night, when the waves rose as high as mountains, the angels spread their wings around the ark, shielding it from the storm, for it carried the last breath of the living world. After 150 days, the waters began to recede. The ark came to rest upon Mount Ararat. When Noah released a dove, it returned with an olive branch in its beak, the sign that heaven's wrath had subsided. And as the door of the ark opened, the first light after the flood broke through the clouds. A rainbow stretched across the sky, God's covenant with mankind. "I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." But the memory of the flood lives far beyond the pages of Scripture. From Egypt to Mesopotamia, from India to China and the Americas, every ancient culture tells of a great deluge that destroyed the world, leaving only a few survivors to rebuild. It is as if the memory was etched into the soul of humanity itself, a divine reminder that God's patience is vast, but his justice never sleeps. Modern science has uncovered layers of ancient silt stretching from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas and fossilized sea creatures atop mountain peaks. Evidence that once waters truly covered the earth. They call it a geological event, but to those who believe it is the mark of heaven's judgment and the beginning of mercy. Today, as humankind once again grows proud, as the earth is stripped bare, morality collapses, and man places himself equal to God, the story of Noah echoes like a final warning. This time the flood may not come as water, but as the tide of sin, greed, and self-destruction rising within every soul. The angels who once shielded Noah's Ark still watch in silence, grieving, waiting to see whether humanity will humble itself and repent, or let the flood of its own making drown yet another world blessed by God. For as in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and took them all away. For the great flood is not only history, it is prophecy spoken for this age and for us. The world today is no longer drowning in water, but in another kind of great flood, one of morality and the soul. We are living in an age where every value has been reversed. In nations that once printed the words, "In God we trust," on their currency, people now remove the Bible from schools, yet allow children as young as 6 or 7 to read books encouraging gender transition. In America, moral education classes have been replaced by progressive sex education, where children are taught that there is no right or wrong, only personal feelings. Hollywood movies that once celebrated love and virtue are now filled with violence, infidelity, and distorted values. Celebrities flaunt their bodies for fame, while those who live humbly are mocked as outdated. On social media, millions compete to show off their egos, yet forget the essence of their hearts. Movements once born from the pursuit of justice have now turned extreme. People are forced to accept sin as something normal. Men call themselves women to enter girls' locker rooms, and anyone who dares to disagree is branded an enemy of progress. Even churches, once the symbol of faith, are now divided by politics, by power, and by fear of speaking the truth. Modern humans can build rockets to Mars, yet cannot keep a family together. Divorce, depression, and suicide have reached the highest levels in human history, even in the wealthiest nations. Many live surrounded by lights, yet their souls are darker than ever. The more people chase freedom, the more they lose peace. The richer they become in possessions, the poorer they become in spirit. The world now lives as though God no longer exists. And when man no longer fears heaven, he begins to see every sin as normal. But the Almighty is still watching. He need not punish immediately, for cause and effect will fulfill his will. When goodness leaves the hearts of men, nature will rise against them. When morality collapses, humanity will destroy itself. The next great flood may not come with water, but with chaos, war plague, and the collapse of the human spirit. And then, as in the days of Noah, only a few will keep their faith, those who still live righteously, who keep their hearts pure and who dare to speak the truth in an age of deception. They are the Noahs of this century. If the world still wishes to be saved, each person must return to goodness, starting from the simplest things. Stop lying, stop hating. Live honestly, love deeply, and fear God once more, for the Lord has spoken. When mankind forgets me, they bring destruction upon themselves. O people of this world, may you find your way back to truth, compassion, and forbearance. And so, through the passage of thousands of years, the greatest civilizations from Lemuria and Atlantis to Babylon, Pompeii, and Petra have all vanished into the shadows of time. Not because heaven was cruel, but because humanity forgot the source of the light. Now, as mankind enters what it calls the modern age, we once again stand before the threshold of another great flood, not of water, but of collapsing morality, fading conscience, and dying souls. We have built cities higher than ever before, yet our hearts have sunk lower than ever. We have created technologies that connect the entire world, yet we have never been more distant from one another. We speak of freedom, yet we are chained by desire, greed, and the fear of our own emptiness. When a society begins to call sin normal, when truth is silenced in the name of tolerance, when children are no longer taught to thank their Creator, but are told they can create themselves, then mankind is already sealing the coffin of its own civilization. But it is not too late. Even in the darkest hour, God always leaves a way. Just as He once let Noah build the ark in the desert, He is still calling us home today. Not with thunder or fire, but with quiet signs all around us, a storm stronger than any. Before a child asking, "Why do people hate each other?" a lonely soul still whispering a prayer in the night. All of these are reminders that the Almighty is still here. And He is still waiting for mankind to bow once more. So live righteously. Keep your heart pure. Speak the truth even when you stand alone. Love others even when the world forgets how to love. For only when we kneel before the Creator can we truly stand firm in an age of collapse. And tonight, in the stillness of your heart, may you whisper to Him, "Lord, let me keep my goodness in a world that has lost its soul. Give me the courage not to drown in the flood of sin, but to become a seed of light for the new age that is to come. And when the storms of the world rise again, let my heart remain steadfast in you. When voices of deception grow loud, let me still hear your whisper in the silence. When the world chooses darkness, let my soul remember the warmth of your truth. Teach me to forgive, even when I am hurt, to love, even when love is mocked, and to believe even when the world says there is no God. For you alone are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who was and is and will always be. Let your mercy cover the earth once more and awaken those who have fallen asleep in comfort and pride. Call back the hearts that have forgotten you and lift the eyes of the lost toward heaven again. For when all else fades, power, wealth, and fame, only your word will remain. Amen.